sequence, but it also involves interpretation. I'm sure you know about the type of history people of my generation went through. It was all this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, without any connections, without any interpretation. But history today is written as a description and also as interpretation. These elements are crucial. Professor Barraclough defined history in this sense as the attempt to discover on the basis of fragmentary evidence the significant things of the past. In other words, you are looking for the significant things in the past. And what you are using consists of fragmentary evidence, bits and pieces that you're going to put together to construct the story in a coherent way. So it says the attempt to discover on the basis of fragmentary evidence the significant things of the past. So note here that is not everything that is the subject of history. It is those things that are significant. And you discover them on the basis of fragmentary pieces of evidence, which we call sources. So history is about the past. It's an attempt to put together to a coherent story what happened in the past. And the resources you require include evidence, pieces of evidence, and you interpret this evidence. Now, what about biography? Biography is essentially a species of historical writing. That's one of the types, a type of historical writing. It is the life story of a person written by someone else. If it is written by oneself, it is called autobiography. So that book that the gentleman kindly referred to, which is my biography written by myself, is titled as A Trajectory of Life, an autobiography, which means I wrote it myself. So when somebody is writing about me, it's biography. When I'm writing about myself, it's autobiography. Now, the methodology of biography is essentially not different from that of other forms of historical writing. The methodology is the same. Now, let me move on to the importance of history and biography. The Roman scholar called Cicero stresses the importance of history, including biography, in his work titled De Oratore. This is what it says: to be ignorant of what happened before you were born is to be forever a child. For what is a man's lifetime unless the memory of past events is woven with those of earlier ones? So he said, what is life if you cannot remember or you have no idea of what happened in the past and how what happened in the past connects with the present? So biographies are very, very important. It connects the past and this thing. In this one, I've described my childhood when I lived with my grandmother up to the time I grew up, went to school, but I finished school, my career, and so on. So I'm connecting various aspects of my life through time. And that is what biography does. Levi-Strauss, another historian, reinforces Cicero's comment with a warning. Those who ignore history condemn themselves to not know the present. He said, if you don't know the past, if you don't understand the past, how can you understand the present? Because as we just read, the two are connected. The present stems from the past. So unless you understand the past and you know what happened, you cannot understand what is going on now. Oxford University professor Hugh Trevor-Roper added in the early 1960s, quote, "We study history in order to understand how we have come to be where we are." So the whole purpose of history is like a journey. You start from point A, you have reached point D, and it tells you the stages you've passed through life. Now, this definition is also shared by another professor, Professor Walsh, who defines history as, quote, not just a plain record, not just a plain record of past events. So it's not this happened, that happened, on 28 we did this, 29 December we did it, in January we did this, just plain event. It's not just a plain record of past events, but a significant record, an account in which events are connected. So first, it's not just a plain record, just enumerating, counting what things that you did. It says it's a significant record, and this record connects events together. So for example, what is the connection between the ex-servicemen arrived at Osu in 1948 and independence, self-government? What is the connection? What part did it play? So you are connecting events. You are not simply enumerating events. Now, notwithstanding the fact that it is history that links our present to our past, many of our generation do not see a virtue in its study. Either they consider a great deal of it to be invention or imagination, or they consider it as a dull subject suitable only for dullards. But for those who value it, history is perceived as playing the same role for human society as the human brain does for the individual. Society does not have a memory of its own. Historians are the memory of society. So what your brain does for you, you go to sleep, you get up, and you see some flowers around you, and you wonder, how did this happen? It is the brain that will explain this. Your friend came here and do that. In the same way, in history, the society, why is that our country has come to be like this? It is the historian who can explain that by linking the past and the present. So, for example, the brain is able to coordinate information, perceive, and so in lieu of an organic memory, society needs history to enable it to relate to its environment. Since the collective group of people, the society, has no brain, then historians become the brain of society, who are interpreting the past to them so that people get to know what happened. The role of the historian may be likened to that of the immune system in human beings. That system establishes a memory of foreign bodies that attack the human body, so as to be able to recognize and resist them in a future recurrence of the attack. Similarly, just as failure of the human brain to function results in amnesia and disorientation, so also societies and nations can hardly have a sense of identity without historical studies. It is the historian who equips society with self-knowledge and understanding of the past to enable it to deal with contemporary problems and propose appropriate and intelligent solutions. Now, what is historiography? Which is essentially what this seminar is about. What is historiography? It's different from history. History is what has been written. Historiography concerns itself with the theory and practice of historical writing. The theory and the practice of historical writing. Essentially, it is the writing of history in accordance with accepted critical standards or systematized principles as enunciated in the cumulative perspectives and scholarship of past historians. In other words, historiography is the science and technique of writing history. The science, the technique of writing history. According to Robert Smith, its emphasis is on the practical aspects rather than the philosophical aspects of history. Herbert Butterfield defines historiography as a fundamental study whose aim is to trace the development and shaping of historical research and writing. So what historiography does is to take us through time, beginning with the BCs, how history has been perceived and how history has been written. So it's cumulative. How did the people of the 17th century write history? How did the people of the 18th century write history? How are people of the 20th century writing history? That is historiography. To trace the development and the shaping of historical research and writing. Now, we come to history and historiography before the 19th century. Briefly, I want to take you through what existed before we come to it. Before the 19th century, there were two opposing traditions of historical writing. One, the ecclesiastical historiographical tradition, and two, the Western secular historiographical tradition. Between the 6th century BC, when the first one started, if you like, and now, historiography has passed through 5 stages of evolution. Let's say stage 1, that covers ancient world from 3000 to 500 BC. During that epoch, an intellectual revolution occurred in Ionia in Greece, during which Greek intellectuals of the period made an effort to understand and explain the human past in a rational way. In that epoch, men believed that historical events were controlled by supernatural powers, namely God and the gods. Consequently, they envisaged history as the unfolding of the plans and purposes of the spirit forces that controlled men's lives. No effort was therefore made to provide rational explanations for events. They didn't explain why things happened the way they did. Hence, the works such as the works of people like Homer, Homer's Iliad, Odyssey, which otherwise are great works of literature, their own right, were not considered as true historical accounts, but as a blend of legend, myth, and a modicum of authentic tradition. Stage 2 was the classical age of Greece and Rome, from 500 BC to 175 AD. The classical age of Greece and Rome was the age of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, all of Greece, and Cicero, Caesar, Virgil, and Horace, all of Rome. It was in this period that the foundations were laid for the study of history. The foundations included awareness of the following considerations. One, the need to take cognizance of facts in history. You cannot write history without facts. Two, the use of human reason to analyze, to break the things into pieces and try to understand them. Three, the need to be skeptical. This is a quality which every historian must have. You must be skeptical. It's not everything that you take, particularly when you go to the field. They will tell you a lot of things, but you must be discerning. You must be skeptical. That is, you must consider whether what they're telling is probable. Did it actually happen? A typical example which you always come for history. If you go to the researcher and he tells you this, you use your skepticism, your brain. Is this possible? So you don't write things that are not possible. I'm sure at the time the law of gravity had not been suspended, so the stool would not have been intact when it hit the ground. Stage 3, was the age of these people, and I've indicated the things that we need to emphasize. Stage 3 is what we call the dark and medieval ages, from the 5th century to the 15th century. The fall of Rome in 410 AD, caused by the barbarian invasions, marked the beginning of the disintegration of the classical world and of the so-called classical civilization. In the confusion that ensued through the Dark Ages into the medieval ages, the Catholic Church emerged as the stabilizing force. And this opened the way for Christian historiography to gain ascendancy over classical historiography. So classical historiography went out of fashion. And now the way of writing history was to place God at the center. God is the pivot around which all things revolve. Bishop Eusebius, who was the bishop of Caesarea in northern Palestine at the start of the reign of Roman Emperor Constantine. Now, he is credited with this phase. Now, the Emperor Constantine granted religious toleration to Christianity, which had been under sustained persecution. And he made the church and state complementary in 324 AD. Bishop Eusebius took advantage of the newfound freedom to publish a book titled Ecclesiastical History, about 312 AD. That book marked the opening of a new chapter in historiography. That historiography concerned itself with the story of the rise of Christianity and differed markedly in approach from classical historiography. Eusebius' book, Christian Historiography, was the Christian response to the mid-6th century intellectual revolution in Ionia, in which Ionian cosmogonists sought to replace God with human reason. The cosmogonists taught that the world was a natural world, and so, in order to know and understand it, required a conscious, rational investigation. Without a conscious, rational investigation, you could not understand the world. Bishop Eusebius' genre of history set out to dispute that the city of God placed God at the center of history. not human reason, and postulated that history was about the unfolding of God's divine purpose for mankind. Then we move into stage 4, the Renaissance period, late 15th century, 16th century. In the medieval age, classical literature and art became moribund, but the Renaissance movement of the late 15th century and 16th century sparked off a renewed interest in them. Scholars of the Renaissance period engaged themselves in the study of rhetoric, poetry, grammar, and history. These are the fields that we refer to as the humanities. So once somebody is in the humanities, these are the fields. Renaissance humanist historians return to the classical conception of history. They attach greater importance to interpretation of the past than to detailed documentation of events. As I've said, not this happened, this happened, this happened. But interpretation became a key issue. And they emphasize utility rather than accuracy. To them, a history to be useful, it must be useful. So if it doesn't matter if parts of it were not accurate. Secularization of historiography in the Renaissance period placed man rather than God at the center of history. It emphasized human reason as the key to understanding human society and what goes on in it. Greek and Roman examples became the model for art, literature, history, philosophy. Indeed, the conduct of life everything was based on the model of the Renaissance period. The last stage is the modern era from 17th to the 19th century. Before then, as we have indicated, what passed for historical knowledge was nothing more than myths, legend, and hearsay. It was in the Ionian period, intellectual movement that laid the foundation for the modern discipline of history for us also to build on. So the question is, how did that happen? How did the modern history emerge? They did so by distinguishing fact from myth. There's a difference between fact and myth. The example I gave, your Confucius thing, is a myth. It's not fact. It cannot be a fact. And it made patient observation and inquiry the basis of historical knowledge and writing. So history is based on patient observation and inquiry, which we call research. The humanist historians of the Renaissance era built upon the Ionian foundations and elaborated their tenets. In this way, they contributed to the flowering of historiography in the 17th century. It was indeed in that century that the first purposeful steps were taken towards the serious study of history. The 17th century introduced the first significant innovations in historiography in terms of, one, subject matter. In this respect, they recognized man as the subject or the focus of historical study. Two, purpose. The purpose was to use human reason to discover, as to know and understand man's past using human reason. Three was causation, how things happen, how things are caused. They made a search for causes, a key ingredient of historical methodology, particularly at the level that you are writing in the university. History is not simply a chain of events, an enumeration of chain of events. You have to deal with causation, how things came to be what they are, and so on. Then you have sources. The sources are the pieces of evidence you've gathered that will help you to document, to authenticate, to affirm the truth, and ensure that history does not become a figment of the imagination. History is not guesswork. It's not a figment. It's based on fact. So sources are crucial to documentation. Then skepticism, to ensure that every story about the past was the truth. You have to be skeptical. You have to have a doubting mind. You go into the field and they tell you a lot of things. Some of them are simply improbable. But they tell it to you, and if you're not careful, you are going to use this as well. So you must have a skeptical mind. Ask yourself, these things that they are telling me, did they actually happen? Are they reality? So there is a style. They adopted prose language, what the Greeks called simple speech, and emphasized that historical composition must be lucid and fluid. The 18th century gave birth to historical method, and the 19th century revolutionized the historical method. It also inaugurated what we call professional history. Now, to summarize the essential characteristics of historical writing in the classical and Renaissance epochs. One, they stressed the natural world as the subject matter of historical study, not God. Two, they followed a new secularism which promoted and affirmed the primacy of human reason. That human reason is number one in man's quest for improved and better life. Three, the use of concrete data of human experience, factual, empirical evidence. This was encouraged as the raw material for history. Then reliance was placed on a wide range of sources. You don't use only one source for historical writing. You use a variety of sources for writing history. Personal observation, eyewitness accounts, oral tradition, literary works. All these come into use. Then finally, utility was stressed at the expense of accuracy. But today, if history is not accurate, it's of no use to anybody. Explanation and lessons from interpretation of the past were encouraged to guide present conduct. You interpret the past to serve as a guide to conduct in today's world. In the event, it did not matter, as I said, if it was not. The emphasis was in utility. So it doesn't matter if some of your facts are not true, once the objective is met. In the Renaissance period, Machiavelli introduced into historical writing what we call the inductive method. Now, inductive reasoning is the process of discovering general principles from a set of facts. That's what the scientists do. You go from this reasoning to conclusions, and the conclusions become the scientific knowledge, or whatever you call it. That is to say, a historian should avoid arriving at conclusions by referring to principles and judgments deemed to be valid. You see, there are certain things, there are certain theories. This. So this becomes the basis of analysis without reference to whether that thing is proven or not proven. So this was also used by the historians of the period. The inductive method insisted that it was not enough to merely describe an ideal set of behavioral pattern. Just don't describe pattern. This was happening. And then hold them as models for improvement. That people to improve, oh, this were the things that were done. So you look at this, these are the ways to go and improve yourself. That the historian should seek to represent things as they are in real truth. The thing is that if you're writing about the past, try to represent the past as it was in real truth, rather than as they are imagined. People are encouraged not to focus on traditional Christian ethics of the time, but look at the reality. What was the reality? What really happened? Historians were encouraged to argue from evidence to reach conclusions. So you start from evidence to conclusions. You don't start with conclusions and then try to find evidence to support them. Conclusions should not be merely deduced from some theory. They must be empirical and verifiable. And so they emphasize impressions. Now, I might admit here, what I've been teaching here is mostly from the point of view of secular historiography, because I'm not a theologian. But the important thing to note is that whether you're doing secular history or this, the basic steps you take are the same. It's only when you come to the interpretation that you have some formula that you use to interpret your fact. So whilst teaching, I keep on emphasizing to this and that. My historiography is giving you an overview of what it was. Parts of it will help you to do your research and your interpretation, but also I'm not mindful of the fact that you have your explanatory scheme, which you use when interpreting the hard facts that you have gathered. So we move to embarking on biographical research, the rudimentary steps. Step one is the background reading. The writing of academic history begins with curiosity, and you are doing academic history with curiosity about the past and a strong itch to research and document it for the benefit of posterity. This necessitates taking a number of steps towards that goal. First, the researcher needs to spend time on literature survey. This begins with preliminary reading of available, relevant, and pertinent writings on the intended subject of biographical study. If you want to write on A, you start reading all the things you can lay hands on that have been written about A. Now, when you read this, you reflect on them with a view to making the following decisions. One, has this person been studied previously? The subject of the biography. Have other scholars studied him? And if they have studied him, is the study sufficient? If so, was the study thorough enough? Or are there gaps in the study that make further study desirable and necessary? So you see that people have written about other people, still others want to write again on them because all had not been said. A lot have been left out. 3, are there enough resources to assist the inquiry? For example, are there enough informants who are knowledgeable enough and willing and ready to grant oral interviews? Persons willing to transcribe the interview into English if the researcher does not speak the interviewee's native language. If you are speaking, say you are Akan, you're doing research in Hausa areas, you need somebody who will just translate into the language that you want it to be translated, transcribed it. Is there enough written material, documentation on his life that can be readily accessed? So you are trying to gather all the information that you possibly can about that person. Do you have informants who can help you to do that? 3, libraries, archives, pictures, monuments. They all have a story to tell. Do you have these that you can consult for the work that you want to do? At the end of step 1, the student must have a tentative idea of what aspects of the topic have been fully covered. Or if they are not fully covered, which areas are still virgin? And these have not been fully done, so I can still go into that field and top it up. 2, the potential thrust. What's the direction of the study? 3, the title of your study. 4, the nature of the content. What is going to go into the study? And then the range, the variety of sources that are available to you for consultation, information on the study. Step 2 is embarking on research. Before embarking on research, one has to first reflect deeply on what one wants to research into. That is what we call the topic. Why one wants to do that research? That's called the objective. What's your purpose? Why are you studying? 3, how one intends to proceed. That is your proposal and your methodology. Then the quantum of material available for the study. That is your sources. You need these things for the research. So these are crucial things to bear in mind. Step 3 is writing your research proposal. A researcher's proposal is his response and answer raised by the study to be undertaken. Historiographical context, that is, you survey the existing works. That is the historiographical. What has been written in this field and how has it been written? Familiarize yourself with that. The purpose and objective of your study. What is the purpose of studying this person? Then the theoretical framework, the ideas, the theories, the explanatory tools that undergird the study, that inform the main thrust of the work and its conclusions. This is, some people call it the thesis. What is the thesis that you're trying to propose, which you are trying to work on? Then you have literature review. What is the present state of knowledge in your chosen field? Have any previous studies been done? What are the strengths and the weaknesses of existing studies? Are they adequate? That is your objective. So when you are writing about an area, that's what you do. Now let me give you my own example. My book on Achimogbo is the first scholarly study of the state. Maybe I'm reading a lot about it, but a different aspect. But this is the first true history of the area. Now, when I was doing this, I read European histories, and there were a lot of things that I disagreed with. And so this offered my objective. For example, the Europeans said colonialism was here to civilize the African. So I tried to understand civilization and what are the landmarks of civilization: education, human freedom, decent living, all these things. So what I said to myself, to test this European thing, the Europeans were here, to let me look at what they did as against what they themselves prefer to do. Okay, I take education. What they're doing the education field. Look at it, they opened only about 19 schools by 1907, built one secondary school. Is this how they were going to civilize Africans? So you see, what I did was I had a clear view of what I was going to do. To use the evidence or the sources at my disposal to disprove this contention by citing them and so on. Then your methodology. How does your proposal study fit in? How does the researcher propose to approach his study? What are his sources? Archival, you specify the type, the class of documents. Non-archival, for example, interviews by questionnaire, participant observation, your mode of analysis, and then the potential contribution that your study will make to knowledge. These are usually stated in the form of statement of the problem, then literature review, aims and objectives, theoretical framework, methodology, and the design, that is the structure of the study, in which you outline the content as the chapters. This will go into chapter 1, this will go into chapter 2, this will go into chapter 3. Now, archival and field research. You begin with archival, and I will recommend that you start with archival sources. Now, history is not a figment of the imagination. It is a record of what actually happened in times past. There are often events that antedated the researcher's birth. Consequently, it needs to rely on recollections of contemporaries who were eyewitnesses to the events, and the researcher wishes to write that the researcher wants to write about. They are a very key group that you have to go. Contemporary written records. What were the writings of the period, the records, that capture bits and pieces of the events of the past? They also can help you. Diaries, newspapers, memoirs, letters, minutes of meetings, diplomatic correspondence, official speeches, court records, parliamentary proceedings. These are some of the contemporary written records. You take those that fit your project. Then you have unwritten records, photographs, maps, sketches, and so on. These bits of information from the past, which have left traces of past events and occurrences, are what historians refer to as sources. So when you say, my sources, you say, I'm going to rely on these bits of information from the past, which have left traces of themselves, of the events. These are what I'm going to be attention. Now, there are two types of sources. Written sources are divided into two categories. We have primary sources. They are those which originated as sensitive, confidential records. In those days, you could not look at them because they contain the truth. Today, civil servants are allowed to see their reports. So those who write reports on them are careful. But in those days, you had the 30-year rule. Nobody's going to see what I've written about you until 30 years' time. So I can say anything and hope that within the next 4 years, you won't attack me. But today, people are careful. They are more often than not kept under lock and key away from the eye of authorized person. They are usually in archives or museums. 2, secondary sources consist of narratives, prose compositions built out of primary sources. So, for example, I use primary sources to write my history of Achimogbo. But once I finish, that book now becomes a secondary source. You may use it, but it's a secondary source. And if you rely on that alone, your thesis is not going to be passed. You must go direct to the same sources that I use, because you may want to reinterpret some of the things I interpreted. Secondary sources consist of narratives, that's monographs, what we call books, journal articles, theses. These are all secondary sources. There are also sources that exist in unwritten form, oral tradition, rituals, archaeological finds, proverbs, drum, on language, place names. All these things yield considerable data for your work. After satisfying yourself or going through this of the feasibility of the study and defining its scope, the student now begins with archival research. Archival research, I suggest first, because it will raise a lot of things which may be clarified when you go to the field. First, how do I assess the right document in the archives? There is what they call class list in the archives, which contain all the documents stored in the library. For example, in the Public Records Office in London, you have CO 98. This deals with Gold Coast Native Affairs Department. So if you're dealing with colonialism, for us, this is a source that you cannot afford to miss. Now, in Prague, the reference is ADM, administrative. So these contain the reports of the district commissioners, the provincial commissioners, and every 3 months they had to submit a quarterly report to Accra, detailing things in the district, marriage, deaths, crime, economic activities, political activity. All these are listed. So if you take the ADM series, you get all the information about the area that you are studying. In Prague, as I said, there's the ADM. Now, you have to correctly reference the work for easy identification and retrieval. The man who is giving you the documents will simply look at, what you tell him is what he does. So you have to know exactly what you want. So you spend some time in the archives going through this thing and listing the documents you think will be of help to you. So once you are in the archives, you simply take out a paper, they'll give you a small paper, put on this and say, these are the documents I want. And then they will go and retrieve them for you. When you finish, you return them, they bring you another set. Now, when you're taking notes, you need not take them verbatim, word for word. You can develop your own abbreviations in order to move faster. You may paraphrase, for example. It's only when you are quoting that you quote exactly. Your quotations must be dead accurate. You cannot afford to put into somebody's mouth what he has not said. So quotations must be dead accurate. Do not gloss over comments in the minutes. Sometimes alongside the margins, you'll find comments. Comments can reveal a lot to you. The state of the mind of the colonial official or whoever was minuting, and so on. They'll give you an idea of the policy preferences, how what official thinking was, what the prejudices were, and so on. Now, was present for chiefs as against educated elite, genuine respect for traditional institution. I found that the reasons for preferring chiefs who were largely elite was not because they wanted to preserve our traditions and culture, but because they thought the educated African was too arrogant and diplomatic, so they wanted to take him out of the equation. So the margin comments are very, very useful. Abolition of slavery, an act of humanity or sheer opportunity. The margin comments, the comments on the documents can help you. Then you come to field research. In preparing for field research, you have to have your resources, the questionnaire, the tape recorder, tapes, batteries, and notebooks, etc. You have to make appointments, the criteria for choice of respondents. Why are you choosing Mr. A to be your respondent? Is it on account of his verified knowledge, or because you just think because he's a big man in the area, you can give you information? So you must have the correct reason for choosing the person you are choosing to interview, not his status, but his acknowledged understanding, knowledge of that area. Design of questions. Your questions, how you design your questions are very important. Can you describe the economy of this community? You will ask one of your interviewees in the rural area. It's a wrong question. The right question is, what do people in this community do for a living? That way, you bring them in and they can tell, oh, some are farmers. So that's not a place to display your knowledge of the English language, to bamboozle them. Simplify the language so that they cannot afford to miss the essence of the question you are asking. Questions need to be administered, need not be administered serially. That because you have 80 questions, you start from number 1, number 2, number 3. Sometimes you find that in answer number 1, he has answered number 10. So you don't need to repeat that again. Now, keep interruptions at the barest minimum in the course of the narration, because this upsets particularly the uneducated people. Their mind runs in a certain direction. So if you keep on interrupting, they forget what they have in mind to tell you. What are the things that you need to take? Responses to the questions, proverbs, recitals, anecdotes, songs, appellations. Then souvenirs that you may want to collect are photographs. Ask for photographs relevant to the research, write-ups like family histories. Some people may have documents with them, date of birth, date of this thing. Now, you'll be surprised that when I was doing my presentation for the Oforata election, the amount of information we had. For the first time, I saw Oforata's children, all of them listed. It starts with the name of the mother, 80 children, the name of the mother, the name of the child, his mother's name, the date of birth. All these things are listed. Something that will help if our catechists in the rural areas will start documenting the people they baptize. Keep records for the sake of this program. Now, the historiographical call, I'm concluding. The historiographical course at ACI attempts to blend the relevant aspects of the secular and the divine purpose approaches. So I'm using the two approaches I used. And I tell students that where it is not appropriate, use the relevant or the correct thing that you're being taught here. But for most of your research work and so on, you'll find that there's no difference between what you do here and what we do at Lego. So that makes the course much broader in scope to accommodate a diversity of approaches and equip research students generally with all the rudimentary skills in historical research and writing history. The critical examination of sources, the selection of particular details therefrom, and the synthesis of the selected material. So essentially, this is what you examine your sources and decide which ones are appropriate to your study. You select the particular details from it which will help you to write. And in writing, what you're doing is synthesizing the selected materials into a coherent narrative that will stand the test of critical examination. So when your examiners come around, you'll have fulfilled all these requirements and they'll be happy with your work. My time is up, so I will stop here And then I think later on, I hear that later on there'll be a session for questions and answers, and I'll see how best I can answer your question. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you also very much, Prof. We are deeply grateful for sharing with us so much information on the fundamentals we need in place to be able to undertake biographical research and the broader context within which we have to carry that out. Thank you very, very much. We will proceed actually with the question and answer session. If you have a question, yes.
Do we do it now or according to the program? I thought this was going to come at the end of it, but I'll be happy to take the questions now if that's allowed. Oh, okay.
So we will begin with the question and answer session.
Go.
Yes, thank you. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand or mute your mic and ask the question, or use the chat column to pose your question and then we'll take it up. So the floor is open.
Yeah, Rector.
Yes, Prof. Larry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much for this presentation. Just a quick one on your experience of Abrewanana.
That is it. It's a model for those who want to write biography.
Yes. I recall that I visited in a couple of days times in your house, and we had some discussion on, and I was quite fascinated by the record keeping. Of course, well, you mentioned your days in Accra Academy before you go to Accra Academy and all that. What role does record keeping, and particularly relying on memory? Because if you don't keep diaries, I was just wondering what you could have done, about all these records in the 30s and early 40s and all that. So what advice do you have for those who intend to write their biographies, autobiography, what you should even begin to do now?
Okay. Now, what I do, even till today, what I do is that I read the newspapers and I just mention issues I have a diary. I've kept a diary since my secondary school days. Every year, so I can give you all those records. So when you come to write any project, all I do is go to my diary. I know, this diary, we're talking about the drowning of the 13 people. Just how I list it. It's there, and the sources are there, graphic, pages, so and so. So I don't have a difficulty. All I have to do is to look for graphic of that day and then look at this thing. So it's important to keep records in your personal life. At least your children, your grandchildren will come to see the diaries and they'll be informed. A lot of data that they can put to good use. So I think otherwise all you have is the archives and then the other places. So I would strongly recommend keeping diaries.
Yeah, and just a follow-up. In your time, you're writing a lot of letters, and I believe that people still have in their possession letters that they are still keeping. Today, the art of letter writing is almost gone. So people are writing the emails, WhatsApp, and all that. What is your opinion on that? How do we go about it?
Well, I see it as posing a threat in some ways. After all, those who write these things, except how many of them put their names to it? And how many of them do you know and can vouch for? If you can vouch for them, then do you use what they've written as authoritative and correct? So it poses a lot of danger. Unless you know the person that is writing, you know it's an acknowledged scholar, for example, on Asante history, and is writing something in the papers. Sure, you can rely on it. His name is there, and you can use it. But some coffee men say, oh, this is somewhere you don't know. Suddenly comes and it propounds a lot of rights. You can't use it, because that is why you have citation of sources. You have to cite the sources as your authority. In other words, what you are saying is that if you don't believe me, and this is, go and look at this authority. And this person is not an authority. And so if you don't cite properly, that can even be grounds for referring your thesis or for failing it. Because the history we read, though based on facts, strictly speaking, is based on facts. So you have the facts before you interpret. If you don't have the facts, how can you interpret? So the facts must be accurate. And I agree with you that it's a threat. So you may use them if they are authoritative. You know the person is reputed to be knowledgeable in that field. Then it's all right. But if you have doubts, I wouldn't advise it.
Thank you. I see Stephen Doku, your hand is up. I want Stephen Doku, is your hand up? All right, Dr. Waigi.
Oh yes, thank you, Prof. And Prof. Adofeni, thank you so much. It's such a privilege to listen to you again and to be educated and to be reminded things that are so essential, but we don't pay too much attention to. So thank you, and great to see you again. I'm very glad.
Thank you.
I was going to begin on a lighthearted note, following up what Professor Lai has mentioned about you. If you could share some insight, some secret to your longevity, especially your mental longevity and sharpness. You've alluded to the diary, but if there's more, maybe some secret portions, maybe you could share with us. But my question is to do with the distinction between, I think you used once the phrase discernment and skepticism.
Yes.
So discernment you only mentioned once, but skepticism you repeated a few times as an attitude to deploy in the historicity. My question is, at a time when whether it's through social science or maybe the dominance of a secular outlook to life.
Yes.
It's so easy to judge and dismiss just because something is religious or something is beyond our scope of understanding. So I'm just wondering whether skepticism ought to be the attitude of the Christian scholar rather than the discernment aspect. Openness, yes, affirming, yes, but still seeking discernment.
Okay, thank you very much. I think by skepticism, what I really am looking at is the source. You must be skeptical about the source you are using.
Yeah.
Because as I say, there's so much deceit these days. In the archives, for example, let me tell you an experience I had. When I was teaching at Legon, my colleague, Dr. Baku, who was also practicing as a lawyer, had a case in court. And what happened was that a family, an old man in the Kwawu area, had given part of his land to somebody from northern Ghana to look after for him, caretaker, because his children were not interested in farming. And somehow, his children, after generations, decided to forge documents to own the farm outright after the old man was gone. So Dr. Baku was holding hearing that case. So he came to me and said, according to them, the document that they were holding was even signed by the district commissioner, and they have that document. Now I looked at it, and I instinctively I told Mr. Kofi, this is a forgery.
Mm-hmm.
There was no district commissioner for Kwawu before 1875.
Mm.
It was only later, that it was part of the Ashanti area. It was only after this that the DC was. In fact, there's a record in which the Ochenhi, for example, was saying that there was interference in his affairs from Ashanti and other places. And you had even, the Kwawu chief also had asked to be given protection from Ashanti control, because Kwawu was under Ashanti administration. So for anybody to say that he has a document signed by the DC for Kwawu before 75, it's forging the document.
Right.
This is what helped him to win the case.
Right.
You see, so this is what I mean by being skeptical about the document merely because it's on paper. Does not mean that it is correct, it's true.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what deciding is, as you know, I agree with you, that will come into interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
So we always say that historians argue about interpretation, but not the facts. We all agree on the facts. We use the same fact. But when we come to interpret, then people's outlook, people's background, people's culture, all intrude. And so you have different interpretation. So I agree with you. What I mean by skepticism is be sure of the authenticity of the document that you are using.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Prof. I will choose.
Yeah, Emmanuel Titi.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Pardon? I have a problem with my ears, my hearing.
From the list of raised hands, Emmanuel Titi, I think, is the next person.
Okay.
Emmanuel, are you there? Okay. Yeah, Emmanuel, go ahead. Emmanuel, are you there?
I think he has left the meeting, Rector.
Okay. The next is Jonas from the list here.
Yes, thank you, sir. Prof, it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
It's always a good time to hear you speaking.
You.
Today, I picked on the word inductive.
The word?
Inductive.
Inductive.
Yeah, as an aid to historical interpretation.
Okay, let me what I've done.
It is something that you spoke about.
Yes, I did. I want to call exactly what I said. I was talking in connection with the modern secular historians who are saying that there's a method they call inductive method, which means that you proceed from the facts as you know them to the drawing of conclusions out of the facts. So their conclusions will come out of the facts that you have been able to. So if the facts are wrong, then what you are saying is also wrong. I just wanted to see what I made like this and look at it.
My question.
I think I was dealing with was it the 18th or the 19th century?
Yes.
The relationship, what they understood by inductive reasoning was that you discover general principles from a set of facts. And my understanding of that, now I want to say that Kofi is a criminal. I'm saying Kofi, what are the facts that will point to, listen, he stole from here, he murdered somebody here. These facts that I cite are the basis of the conclusion that he's a criminal. So this is where that you draw your conclusions from the set of facts that you have adduced. So if the conclusion does not follow from the fact you have, then it's not appropriate, the conclusion, but it must logically flow from the facts that you have cited. This is my understanding of that thing.
My question is that if, incidentally, this method can be used for biblical studies, if the Bible acts the base for facts, but then the period with which you refer to followed a tradition of two English people, Baconian and Thessian. So, but what I'm being careful about is the fact that something like that has historically been developed in an English context. Mm-hmm. And if I want to use it to substantiate my methodology in biblical studies, then I have to make a reference to the fact that this theory has emerged from an English context. So my problem is that, but then I also know that within the context of Akrofi, we are trying to limit the import of Western entanglement in the way we study. But by you mentioning this as a historical tool for interpretation, I see it also as a viable tool for biblical studies, which in actual sense is being used in theological circles. So how far can we go in terms of using things that have been established within the English academic environment and tested and also engage them in a historical analysis or our studies within the context of the African theological scholarship?
Okay. I was careful to tell you that there are two traditions of historiography that you are dealing with at the here. And that's why I'm careful. I'm just telling you what we in the secular field have accepted. So that, for example, if somebody was writing a thesis for me in Lagos, and he draws conclusions that are not based on the facts that he has adduced, I'm not going to pass that thesis. But I've also said that here you have a different worldview, and here you have an explanatory scheme which is accepted. So within that context, it is yours that should prevail. If somebody used yours, for example, in Lagos, where it's writing a secular history, it's likely to be condemned. So this is not factual. This is not factual evidence, so we can't accept it. You know, like when I, as a Christian, I know what role God has placed in mind. Sometimes, you know, the things that happen to me cannot be but result of divine right. But if I'm writing a secular history for purposes of examination, my concern is to get a degree, isn't it? So I do what the institution requires for me to do. When you have finished your thesis, like after I finished there are a lot of things that my supervisor disagreed with me, but which I insisted on, and I've included them. So I'm talking about this in the context of an institution. You know exactly how to interpret, the tools of interpretation. But I'm limiting myself strictly to the methodology, gathering your evidence, looking at the evidence and so on. So wherever you think the secular interpretation does not conflict with the scheme in Akrofi, then you can use that. Where it digresses from it, then what should prevail is what is being done here. So, this is just an overview.
I think one of my basic concern is can I actually say that the theory I'm using.
Jonas.
Yes, sir.
Please yield the floor to somebody else.
Okay, thank you, sir.
What I will say is that if you are convinced, discuss this with your supervisor, and if your supervisor approves of it, it means he shares your views, and in an examination situation, he can help you defend what you're saying. It's very important because the university has requirements. They have the frame of mind, and you can't go outside it. So what I'm trying to do is, this is what we do in a secular context. This is how we write history. Whatever is applicable, you adopt it. If it's not applicable, you do what the institution requires you to do. That's all I can say.
Okay.
Yes, please,
Yes, please
can you hear me now, please?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my question follows. It's related to what Dr. Waigi asked earlier concerning the issue of skepticism in evaluating narratives that we get to the field. Now, in explaining the basis for skepticism, Prof alluded to...
Yes, I'm listening. I'm listening.
Yes. But the point is, researching within religion, you may not have to always allude to such scientific facts. Yes, Prof have made a point that he is referring to scientific research. But even within the social sciences, there is also the sociological aspect of the people you are investigating. And in our African context, we know that issues of the sacred is given so much weight in the worldview of the people. So, Prof, my question is, when you are evaluating facts that you pick on the ground, even within social scientific research, to what extent do you take into consideration the socio-religious worldview of the people? In relation to the Akrofi story, for instance, which you've used as an example.
No, I would have loved if you could give an example that I can relate to.
Yeah, so probably, I mean,
for example, we are talking of facts. And I give one example that is common knowledge, that people have written in the history books that the golden stool came from heaven. Is this a fact? You see, fact in the sense, your senses, your empirical. In our secular, we rely on empirical evidence, things that you can see, things you can verify, and so on. So if somebody wrote this for me, I would not accept it by the dictates of the tradition that I belong to. But if in your field this is allowed, why not? Then, so that's why I'm saying that most of the things that I'm saying are from my experience as a secular historian. At any point where it does not agree with what you are doing here, what is the framework that is supposed to obtain? It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that Legon and the other universities while we're dealing with secular history. These are the things we do. There are areas where you do similar things. But for example, in gathering your this was the technique of questioning and so forth. You are looking for facts. You are not looking for opinions or what you are looking for facts, explanation. People tell you that this happens and therefore as a result this happens. If the explanation is sound, okay. If it is not sound, you don't accept it. So that's why I made a point that it's a combination of two worlds. What we do in the secular area, and that is how we gather data. That is what we mean by sources, concrete experience, things born up by human experience. You do those things. But while in your field, if that thing is not accepted, why not? Because you are not writing for the traditional or secular historian. You are writing for Akrofi-Christaller. So that is how you use it. So it's just an open thing. I'm giving you an overview of how secular history has been written over time. If there are areas that you disagree with, perhaps you can do something in your thesis that will be an innovation and which will make your thesis a different thing, which will be acclaimed worldwide. But my simple job is this is how history is written in the secular world, where there are no differences between lessons. You use it. Where it is contrary to what you're doing here, particularly in the explanatory realms, the theories, then I don't see why you cannot use that. I'm not knowledgeable in that area, so I won't presume to debate you on those things.
Well, thank you. Dr. Maureen here, Nacho, and then Joseph JB, and then Dr. Ndila. So, Dr. Maureen.
Hey, Maureen.
Maureen, are you there? Unmute and let's hear you, please. Oh, she left. I'm sure she'll be back.
I haven't left. Can you hear me?
You have to wait. Joseph. Joseph JB.
Yes, sir.
Okay, please go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Prof, for your presentation. Very, very insightful. I just have a few follow-up questions from Professor Lai's question, or the issue he raised on the use of modern media and communication. And I wanted to interrogate further how these count as primary sources. For instance, you cannot write a history of President Trump without looking at his tweets. A WhatsApp conversation could very well lead you into the mind of a scholar or a historical figure, a person you are investigating to write a biography. So I just wanted a bit more clarity on how these modern media, for instance, a Facebook post or a series of Facebook posts, can constitute a primary source that helps you to formulate a biography or to dig into the mind of the person you're investigating. And also to find out if WhatsApp conversations, because of distance, you might have someone you are investigating and you're not close by. So a series of emails might be the primary source for some of your writing. Is that also something that is viable? Thank you.
It's very, very problematic. If your own research, the traditional sources of research, the archives and so on and so on, I believe the proper place is to depend on for an MPhil or a PhD thesis. And remember also that in most of these emails and so on, they hardly authenticate the sources of the information. You don't know where that information is coming. You just put there. So if you are asked to defend it, how do you defend it? Somebody that Mr. A and so on killed somebody in a public place, everybody was there and so on. He said he killed this. Do you have, say, a photograph to show? Photograph of the scene. How can I believe what you're saying without any documentation, without telling me the source of the information, where you got that information from? So I have a problem with that. They just put the thing back on the screen and everybody accepts it as the truth. Whereas if you go deeply into it, you say that what they're saying is false. So are you using false data? So the problem is, how do you vouch for the authenticity of the information that is being put there? If you have the means of checking and you have every reason to believe that is true, then you can use it and prepare to defend it. Otherwise, I would say you should be very worried about using most of them are made up. That's all I can say about that. Yeah. For serious academic work, I think you have to be a little more careful.
Dr. Maureen, are you back?
Yes, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, Prof. It's nice to see you.
It's good to see you.
See all the familiar voices. I'm so happy I could join in. Yes. Prof, thank you so much for that very, very insightful and rich presentation. I want to talk about, this kind of, I think, dispute that we've been having about discernment and skepticism. I think from your presentation, what I got is that we are talking about facts. You say empirical, verifiable, authentic, documented evidence. So if we're doing that, can we say there are facts for Christian historians and other facts for secular historians? Because you seem to run back into saying at the university what you teach is secular history. But history is for everybody. History affects everybody, not just Christians and secular people, even though between or on the fringe. If it is God's world, is there a world for Christians? And is there a world for secular people? I believe in what presented, you're urging us to see the connections. The facts are the same for everybody. So it is how we go about getting those facts and how we interpret them and how we use them to write a history or life history of a person or a society. That's what is significant. That's my own reading, because we sometimes, or I think maybe we're in the danger of spiritualizing historiography, so that when we use a word like discernment, it makes it Christian. But discernment is a neutral word. Anybody can be discerning. Of course, if you're a Christian, your discernment is enriched by the presence of the Holy Spirit, the Word of God. But even traditional people can have discernment. I think you can call it intuition. Yes. So I'm thankful for the explanation and the distinction you've made between skepticism. It's not a negative thing. It's just try to be objective. Don't let emotions and other things filter into the facts that you want to analyze. I hope I heard you right. But it's so lovely to see you.
Or coming to my head. Yes, what I'm saying, that this historian from which the word derives is talking about a search for facts. for information. That's how the name derived. So we want to say that on this program on Saturday, Dr. Henacho spoke or made a contribution. Is that a fact? That is a fact. So I said, that, why did he decide to come on this program? That is where you're dealing with interpretation. Somebody will say, oh, he wanted to call him to show, to get contact with their friends and so on. Or somebody will say, oh, he wanted to be seen on television. That's what I do. You have different interpretation, viewpoint. That is, and that's what the discernment, unusual insights that you have. So it's in the realms of interpreting what you say. But the fact, everybody, whether you are a Christian or this thing, for example, accept if you are talking about persecution of Christians, the facts are the same. But why were the Christians persecuted? That is where you are the divergence of they were persecuted because it's another. Oh no, they were that. So for me, that is why I say that the facts are the same for all of us. Fact is a fact. If I say we held a symposium here today, it's a fact. You can't change it. But what you say of the fact depends on your worldview on this, and that's the realm of interpretation. So that's how I understand this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Dr. Miller Johnson.
Yes. I want to say that I have learned a lot from this, and I'm very grateful to Professor on what he has outlined. And I have some few things that they are very hypothetical, but they may border on reality as well. On the biographical research, the first thing is there an ethical framework? Ethical framework of where one can go and where one cannot go. Are there parameters to what one can do? In other words, on this biographical essays or what we write, is it selective, leaving out the bad and the ugly and concentrating on the good for a purpose on which you are writing such biography? That's the first one. The second one is that in some of these biographies that we read, you can see subjectivity in them and not objectivity, because the writer has a point to prove, and what the writer wants to prove, whether factual or imagined, conditions how the biography is put in place. In a situation like that, last two things. Will the autobiography written by the person that may contradict the biography of the writers, will the autobiography have the final word? The last one is historiography provides the grounds for a critical analysis where you take the contradictions together and make mention to them in order that you may arrive at a mean or allow the contradictions to exist and come out with an opinion based on the facts that you have. Are you allowed to do that in any case without mixing things up?
Okay, I'll respond to I think the last but one that you made. What we're saying that history is made up of two. There's the objective fact that nobody can dispute. Can anybody dispute that it was under Kwame Nkrumah that Ghana gained independence? I don't think even the most die-hard NPP man will say no. Everybody accepts because people saw they lived at the time, they participated in the ceremonies. So this is a hard fact that nobody has known. But if you move on to say, what were the intentions of Kwame Nkrumah in leading this country to independence? There will be a host of interpretations. Someone said, oh, he wanted to, it was personal aggrandizement. He wanted to listen, he was in England, he was unemployed, and they asked appointed to help him get a job. So when he came, he was looking for this. Another person, see, because interpretation comes from many, and your religious beliefs can affect the way you interpret. Your culture can in fact affect it. That gives you the perspective. And we don't have, so we recognize that you have the facts and then you have that is why usually the juicy part is interpretation. Somebody gives an interpretation based on facts. Another scholar, based on the same fact, gives another interpretation. And people look at it and say, oh, I like this interpretation, this one is better than that. So interpretation, reinterpretation are going on all the time. So for me, I cannot lay down a hard fact for anybody. It's only about the methodology, how you gather your facts, how you ascertain the validity of those facts. Then the next day you go to this, there's a host of views and opinions. And that is where all these philosophical ideas that you're talking about come from. And people are allowed to do that. You cannot say this is the only way. No examiner can hold you to, as long as what you are saying makes sense. Because we are promoting knowledge. And knowledge goes by opposition of ideas. So I don't want to say that this is the way to go. Apart from collecting your data, you have the data before you. As for interpreting the data, the sky is the limit. Any interpretation that you give that makes sense, and the examiner is not going to, he may say, I disagree with it, but it's a logical conclusion from what you have presented. People, I've examined this and others. Sometimes I disagree with what the person said, but it's so beautifully done. Logically, all that he's saying makes sense. So why I wouldn't let my disagreement with personal disagreement, and we all have prejudices. So my concern is not so much at the interpretation level. That's why I say here in Akrofi, you are taught how to interpret data. So my concern is with the data and how to make sure if I go to the field and somebody tells like for example, I was born in 1948, and yet he tells me that in 1941, Prempeh crossed the Prayer River for the first time to come to Accra. He saw it. It's a contradiction. If you were born in 48, and we are talking about happening in 47, how can you say that you saw it? It's true. What your version is true. I'll be skeptical about taking your version. So these are the little things I'm drawing your attention to. That you want to scrutinize and make sure that the facts are reliable. The next stage is your interpretation, because this is not just narrating many, many facts. You have to, the sweeter part of it is in the interpretation, because that is what gives us new directions and where to go and so on. So it's welcome. It's a welcome part. As long as the interpretation you're giving flow from the facts you have produced, I have no problem with that. The type of, I read it, I see a lot of people, that's not my field, but I think I agree with you. I don't think any examiner or this has the answer to everything. So, as I keep saying, my job is to say, this is how history is written. Parts of it apply to everybody writing, no matter the type. If you are writing about Muslims, you are writing about. The idea is that what you are saying must be factual. Once it's factual, and you say, out of this fact, this is my viewpoint. So interpretations differ, but the facts are the same for everybody. So we quarrel about interpretations, we don't quarrel about facts. That's what I can say.
Okay. Marcel, are you around?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you want to ask your question now?
Yes, sir. So, it's exciting to see you again. I'm very glad to see you. This is Marcel back from Cameroon. Please, I've listened to you speak very passionately this topic time and again because you took us through this historiography. My difficulty now is about myth and excitement.
What?
Myth
and excitement.
The contribution of myth in history, in making history, and the excitement that go with it. There's some excitement, there are some certain things, certain myths that is, and somebody say that, like the conformity school, the school that you're talking about, you know the excitement that goes with it with Akan people, talking about their strength and how powerful they are, the part that school played even in the fight that they had with the colonial people. So now, bringing in this particular word, the skepticism that is always coming in, how do we manage such area in history? The area of myth. Because every people have myths that make up their story. The Ga people will talk about coming from the sea. These other people will say they came from this direction. This one say they came from here. People come from different areas, and those myths have accompanied them in centuries. They go to the field, and the people keep saying they have to interview 100 people, and maybe all of them, after giving you their facts, they link themselves to that myth and telling you that it is where we come from, it is this. How do we manage such aspects?
Okay. Well, if I understood the question well, I think I tell students is that myths are part of the human experience. You know, the fact that you take the Okonfa-Notche thing again. Why did Okonfa-Notche? I think the important thing to us is why did Okonfa-Notche do this? Ashanti was not yet a united people. There were small states around the Kumasi area and the Bakwai area. And Denchina was a superpower. And Denchina was harassing them. Denchina wanted to pass through Kumasi to go and trade in Gonja and all the other things. So that was the time that the Ashanti Union was formed. And incidentally, if you look at the terminology, it's a certainty because of war. They united because of war. Because they were small independent states. So they had a common purpose. And whatever will serve that purpose and make the nation strong was it. So this myth, certainly, in interpretation, I would say it was a very useful thing because it helped unite the nation. They just told them that this has come from the skies. As long as you have this in, you are going to be united, will be stronger. And look at Asante today. It's the most dominant tribe in the city. So in evaluating, in interpretation, this is what has made Asante what it is, a great nation united. Because they believe in this. So the belief that they have in the myth is what is keeping them united and going. So that belongs to the era of interpretation. But you can mention the myth. The myth is a fact that Okonfa-Notche told them this came from. It's the fact that this is what he told them. For me, that is a fact. But is what he said true? That is where I have to go into interpretation and giving my own views. I said no. So I advise students that when you say according to, then you are reporting what people are saying. You are not saying it's true. You are reporting according to this thing. You are all right. People can go investigate and say, we don't agree. But I'm not saying it's true. It came from. I'm saying this is what the people. But the moment you say categorically that the golden stool descended from heaven, as a historian, and what is the evidence? What's the proof? That is how we work. But once this thing is established, yes, that it was a myth. It played a great role in the rise of Asante to power, no doubt about that. But the issue itself was a myth. So there's a difference between, it depends on how you put it. If you are categorical and you say this is what the history is about, what actually happened. So once you say it happened, I want proof. Give me the evidence. Show me, for example, picture of this thing descending. Anything to convince me to accept it. So this is how I think we should view it. You can still talk about myths, that this is what is said, and they have a useful place in history. But as to whether the myth itself should be recorded as factual is what I think we are contesting. But it's not true, but it has been very useful in the development of Asante power.
Well, we are getting close to the end of our time together. Maybe, Prof, let me ask maybe the last question. Let me ask the last question. I
thought I saw Allison's.
Allison, she had to leave, I think. But she listening. Yeah.
Your voice, I can't recognize the face.
Kwashi.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Just we've been emphasizing facts.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you could comment on the danger of being selective in our facts. Not just the interpretation, but selecting the facts we want and leaving out those we don't. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, this is a very, very relevant point. Yes, people deliberately suppress the facts. People, if it's not complementary to them, then so you see history books. Now, somebody will, as I say, you can write a history book about Nkrumah. Okay, let me better illustrate this way. In the 1970s, one Professor Aduboye, my mentor, and I were doing the Digging Our Past, the television program, which was documenting our history. It was a very popular program, people rushing from their jobs to get home to listen to it. We came to program, I think that was 17, and that was on Kwame Nkrumah. So I said to Professor Boy, I said, Prof, I know your views on Nkrumah and the CPP. So if we are going to deal with this program in 30 minutes, the likelihood is that you are going to spend 20 minutes on the bad things that Nkrumah did, and only 10 minutes on the good things that he did. So would you please let us do 2 full programs, 30 minutes on Nkrumah's achievements and 30 minutes on Nkrumah's failures. That way you do justice to this thing. So it's a common thing. That is why people, after they've done research, some people come out and then the same field come and do it again. Because the information, the data that you had tended to one conclusion, whereas that conclusion is not the only conclusion. So let us look at the other side also, or have the 2 sides. If you have what Nkrumah did, what the others did, then you say, for me, this is what I do. That yes, this is what this person did, all facts. But given this and that, I think Nkrumah did better than this man, or that man did better. You can't help having these versions. They're happening all the time, distorting history. There's so much distortion. Because as one philosopher said, everybody comes to the writing of history with a point of view. And that is the point of view that's it. So somebody can write from an ethnic background, look at history from an ethnic background, and what you will write will not be fair assessment of the issue. So yes, that exists. That exists. But that is why you should define your the topic, the areas that you are going to look at, and then sometimes you have even an idea of the conclusion but is the conclusion supported by the facts? That is what generally in history people are looking at. These facts that you have, do they support the conclusion? The conclusion is personal. My senior brother used to tell me that when you are walking on the street, you see two chickens fighting. One has the color red, the other has the blue. All of a sudden, you are urging the one with blue color, no, beat it, come on, go on. And he said, he hasn't eaten your corn. Why is it that you are prejudiced against the one in red color? It's because you love red color. You like everything red, but you don't like anything blue. So these prejudices are there. But a good historian should be able to suppress the prejudices and give a personal opinion. As I said, if you give them, this Nkrumah did this, you give all the things Nkrumah did, good things he did. Then you did all the bad things he did. And you say, in my opinion, this is my conclusion. Somebody said, but they will respect you because you have recognized all the potential facts. But if you suppress some of the facts because you want to reach a certain conclusion, then I think that is wrong.
Well, thank you very much. I know we would want to ask some more questions, but our time is up. We need to take a break and return in some 15 minutes to take our second presentation. On your behalf, I want to say thank you very much to Professor Adepening for sharing these insightful thoughts with us. It will certainly inform, I'm sure, many of the things we'll do moving forward. Those of us who don't keep diaries, I think you should probably start doing that and be thinking also about someday writing your autobiography or keeping enough information to enable somebody to write about you. Thank you very much. Once again, let me warmly welcome many people who have joined us from far and near. Dr. Maureen from Nigeria, Jeremiah, who will be presenting later. I see Dr. Mugambi from Kenya. Of course, Professor Howell was with us from Australia. And there's who is cooling off in the US and all of that. Thank you all for joining in. And Jonas also from the UK and Obli. So all over the world, and we are glad you are able to participate. And myself from Cameroon. Wonderful to see all of you, and we'll continue in another 15 minutes. Yes.
Thank you, sir, for having me. Thank you.
Bless you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Okay, we'll reconvene in 15 minutes to take our second presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Mugambi, are you there?
Hello, Marcos. Marcos. Yes, I have one or two videos. Then you can then take over by presenting, and then I don't know how you want to match the presentation with the PowerPoint. Yes, it's in the ICT. It's in the email. Yeah. So I have the PDF and then the PowerPoint. But then I have a video, two videos I want to share for 5 minutes, which it couldn't go. It's a large MB. So I will just share it for about 5 minutes, and then you can then go on. Thank you. So I think we
are back. We are back.
Yes, sir.
And we would want to continue with our work. As indicated, we move on to our second presentation for the day, and it's entitled Discovering Source Materials for Biographical Study of the Life and Ministry of James Olumide Tondi. And our presenter who has been working on this figure is Jeremiah Oluwagari from Nigeria, where he teaches at the West Africa Theological Seminary in Lagos. We'll yield the floor to Jeremiah now, and he has 1 hour within which to share his presentation with us. Jeremiah, over to you.
Thank you, Prof. I must say that the mirror has been set, having to present alongside my Professor Adolfini. I listened carefully to the presentation and to the questions, and I've learned a lot. I want to, first of all, appreciate my supervisor, rector, Professor Kwashi, and my co-supervisor, Dr. Femi Adeleye. I want to also appreciate the Dean of Accredited Study for giving me this opportunity to share. In doing this, I'm going to be dividing what I'm going to share into these categories. I'm going to be sharing with us for a few minutes a video clip on Shonde for us to have at least a glimpse of who he is and the environment from where he actually ministered. And then I will go into the paper presentation, and at a point I will pause to share the PowerPoints of some source materials I've collected, and then go back to the paper presentation to round up. Now I am presenting the few clip on the video. This is a video on the induction service of James Olumade Shonde as the first district pastor of Yaba District Center. This is Pastor C. Onabanjo, the then, and what we are having on the video now is James Olumade Shonde himself. The then Lagos area superintendent, Pastor C. Onabanjo, is introducing him. Now we have been introduced to the fact that it has just been transferred from Akoka Assembly to Yaba Assembly. They are given a chart to Shonde. This is James Olumade Shonde. And this is the Yaba District Center. He's being given a charge here, and he's saying that he's, with reference, accept the posting from Akoka Assembly to Yaba Assembly. is a pastor and evangelist. This is the wife standing, and that's the first daughter, the Bukun that is standing beside you. Is beside her. Now, having asked Shonde, they are now asking the assembly if they accept you. Now, the church is rising. So what you have heard and you have seen is just celebrated with district, and he was inducted as the first district pastor of Yaba district. Now I go to the presentation. The topic that has been given that I'm presenting, just as the rector has said, is discovering source materials for the autobiographical study of the life and ministry of James Olumide Shonde. It should be a rationale for the research. It should be said from the beginning, from the very beginning, that the field of historical and biblical biographical study is new to me. The intention initially was to do a further research on the field of biblical studies. For instance, my MTH dissertation was carried out on mother tongue biblical hermeneutics. However, the research in historical studies is inevitable thanks to the exposure here at Akrofi-Christaller Institute, especially in following the path of my supervisor to trace how the emerging church from the Western missionary era branched out of the incipient Pentecostal Aladura churches in Africa, particularly in Nigeria and Ghana. Additionally, the apparent neglect of the documentation of indigenous agency has motivated interest in doing a biographical study on the subject of the current research, just as Femi Adeleye did for Samuel Ajayi Crowther. More so, Crowther's Yoruba Bible translation and his Yoruba primer were instrumental in catalyzing the Soyin revival as the Emmanuel Anglican Church Ijebu Mushi in 1894 to the 1900s, from where Sophia Odulami one of the pioneers of the Aladra movement, was born. It was from Ijebu Ishoyin Church that Sophia joined the St. Saviour group. Femi Adeleye's choice of Crowther. Femi Adeleye's choice of Crowther is an area with much documentation. At least the subject is well known, but James Olumade Shonde is much obscured, but known in his constituency as nothing has been written on him until now in the academia. While biographies have been written respectively on the lives and contributions of Western missionaries to the advancement of the Christian faith and missions in Africa, much more needs to be done on the African counterparts. One of the concerns of this thesis is that while so much has been written on the pioneers of African independent churches, AICs, Aladra, Dito Aladra, and the Christ Apostolic Churches, hardly can you find substantial literature on the contributors to the expansion of Christianity within the Apostolic Aladra churches that fell under the British missionaries after the 1935 to 1938 schism, especially of the precious stone church stock. As Arotona indicates, of the early leaders, only Babatope and Fason from Elisha remained at the British church. Most of those who left formed a new body. By 1941, they were established as the Christ Apostolic Church, which with nearly 100,000 members is now larger than the Baptist or the Methodist in Western Nigeria, and is also found in Ghana. The biographies of these men and women have not been written, and the works associated with them have been forgotten. So also elderly ministers of God who were acquaintances to these notable people are dying. Historical documentation and biographies of the leaders of other secessionalist church, such as St. Saviour Apostolic, the African Apostolic or Apostolic Gospel, and many others, varieties of apostolic churches noted by Turner, have not been written. While the historicity of this group is traced, the analysis is carried out on the late pastor and prophet and evangelist James Abo, historical and a literal dream that showcase Shonde and the enormous source materials he, though late, rehearsed in the phenomenal dream encountered. James Olumade Shonde, who can now be considered as an ancestor, appeared unto me in a dream and showed to me where he kept all his secretarial belongings, that one wonder what could this mean. The phenomenal transcendental communication through the supernatural incursion by dreams, according to Arotona's fourth feature of the primal worldview, is a divine instruction from Olodumare, the supreme God in Yoruba cosmology. Certainly, this encounter reinforces the desire to contribute to the historical documentation of the point at which what has now become part of African contribution to global Christianity branched out from the old European missions and gave way to authentic African Christianity. The emerging Christianity can be considered as the fruit of their labor, despite the new wine, in quotes. Most of the key players of Aladra Pentecostal movement, charismatic movement, were once members of the missionary churches. If God is revealing these things, who then is James Olumade Shonde, and why would God want a biographical study of his life and ministry. What are the circumstances of his call? What are the marks of his ministry? In what ways can Shonde ministry impact the contemporary generation of priests, prophets, pastors, teachers, evangelists, apostles, bishops, and reverend ministers? What is the experience like for a prophet like Shonde to work under authority compared to freelance priests and prophets in contemporary Christianity? What are the gospel messages associated with Shonde? How did Shonde comport himself in terms of affluence and avarice in his ministry? What can be gleaned from his theological thoughts? What should be the prophetic role of the church and the state in the 21st century world? James Olumide Shonde was born in the post-Second World War period to the family of a late Yoruba traditionalist, Chief Nathaniel Olusewo Shonde, and late Mrs. Barnes Olushola Shonde ní Salako on December 11, 1953 at Baase Oro Shodoke village in Obafemi Owode local government area of Ogun State, southwest Nigeria. Baase Oro, according to Google Map, Scales is situated on latitude 7 degrees, 10 minutes, and 58.8 seconds north, and longitude 3 degrees, 37 minutes, and 1.2 seconds east, about 20 kilometers from Abeokuta town and Alake Palace, 25 kilometers from Ibadan, and about 10 kilometers from the Lagos-Ibadan Express Road, especially the west end of Unigambari Forest Reserve along Ajebo, Ogun State. The situation of the Apostolic Church at the year of Shonde's birth was that of gloom, doctrinal crisis, great division, and revival here and there worldwide. Thomas Napier Tombo recalls that the Kaba area, northeast Yoruba in Kogi State, served as severed its relationship with us, with the Apostolic Church Nigeria in 1953. Pastor C.H. Rosa and G.H. Williams were instrumental to the peace accord that brought them back. Meanwhile, about this time, Eastern Nigeria was experiencing a tremendous revival. The height of the crisis at this period was with the appearance of the Latter Rain Revival group that emanates from a Bible college in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, Shewan, Canada. The Latter Rain episode was first observed in the interview conducted with Pastor P.O. Ipe. Further information about this group was found in the works of Gordon Weeks. Weeks records that, and I quote, "This year saw the climax of disturbing period in the church because caused by the impact of teaching usually referred to as the latter rain, found in Joel 2, verse 23. The Holy Spirit began to move among this group in intense worship, prophesying, healing, and casting out of evil spirit. Most of the apostolic pastors rejoiced in this new thing, unquote, and compared it to their own experience in the Apostolic Church UK in previous years, and they were invited. The visitors not only preached effective evangelistic ministry, but they also attempted to spread their teaching that all denominational congregation and structure should be demolished and the name the Apostolic Church be abandoned. Some of the African and European pastors were inclined to accept this teaching, but the vast majority rejected it and stood firm for the proven principles and practices of the church. The whole matter was considered at the 1953 May General Council meeting in Bradford. The aftermath of the May 1953 General Council meeting led to the stream that followed in the Apostolic Church worldwide. Two key European missionaries in Ghana and Nigeria exist in the church. Pastor J. McKeon of the Gold Coast, Ghana, and Pastor Sidney Elton of Nigeria by 1954. The exit of McKeon from the Apostolic Church Ghana culminated in the creation of the Ghana Apostolic Church and the later Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah's mediated Church of Pentecost. In the case of Elton, Ayodeji Abodunde clarified, and I quote, "Despite his determination to keep the fire of the revival, that is the latter rain, burning in the Apostolic Church, Elton was not willing to take or sanction a step as drastic as had been taken in Ghana. Months after refusing to reaffirm his consent to the Constitution of the Apostolic Church Bradford, he was still in the church, which resulted in a stalemate. He resigned his appointment sometimes in the middle of 1954. End of quote. Abodunde, citing Ruth Elton's recall of the incidents of his father's exit at this time from the Apostolic Church Nigeria, has this to say, unquote, "My father was at Okeoye, and the people of Okeoye, the seat of Babalola revival of the 1930s, said, 'No, stay, don't go.' And he said, 'Yes, but I must go. This is apostolic, and I am not reaffirmed. This must be apostolic, so I must get out. But don't you,'" that is referring to members of the Apostolic Church Nigeria, "don't you leave the Apostolic Church." End of quote. Even though Elton told the church not to divide, some members went ahead and did into several units under different names. But Elton categorically told them, and beginning of quote, "Well, I am not your leader. You are not getting out to follow me. If you want to get out, that is your business, not mine." Pastor, end of quote. Pastor Rosa replaced Elton at Elisha. Pastor Elton, though did not establish a church, would become the father of independent Pentecostal ministry, focusing on campus fellowships and targeting individuals such as the likes of Archbishop Bessie Tauga, and a host of others. Thus, as shown this part, all these challenges were facing the Apostolic Church worldwide. James Olumade's father, Olusewo, was a diligent cocoa farmer and a descendant of Chief Shoretire Shodeke, the founder and Baale of Ikoro Shodeke. The date Ikoro was built is not known, but that would be much later than 1830. As the name shows, Shoretire is a younger brother to Chief Shodeke, who led Egba people into Abeokuta in 1830, after the demise of Chief Lamodi of Igbeyin and Balogun of the Egba. Lamodi, before his death, chose Shodeke as his successor to continue the Oyo-Egba war. Ikoro village plays a major role in the political and socio-economic development of Abeokuta from its earliest formation. Shreds of evidence of the contributions of the Ikoro community are recorded by the church historian Samuel Johnson and the pastor of Oyo, Chief Nathaniel Olusewo was also a former Baba Ijo church patron of Zion African Church, Baasi Koro Sodeke. He later became the Baale, the high chief of the village after his forefathers. Combining the responsibility of church leadership with the political administration of his domain, the mother, Barnaz Olushola, was a merchant, a farmer, a cocoa produce buyer, and trader from Shapala village of the same local government area. James Olumade Shonde attended the Zion African Church Primary School, Baasi Koro Sodeke, from 1960 to 1965, where he obtained the first school living certificate. He later obtained a Bachelor of Theology at the Apostolic Church Nigeria Lona years after his call to ministry on March 29, 1985, and 40 years after the last primary school education. His longest title, Revivalism and Historical Analysis, is an indication that he intends to know more about the historical studies around his calling. The revivals into which he was commissioned would change his orientation for the rest of his life. He maintained the transport service business until he was called into ministry in 1985. The biography in his burial pamphlet shows that he worked briefly with some private companies as a driver. Later, he started his own transport business. End of quote. Shonde functioned in motivated ministerial duties that include evangelist, pastor, teacher, prophets. But it is significant to note that his dual ministry of the prophet and evangelist was observably comparable to the pattern of the ministries of the likes of Elijah and Elisha in 1 Kings 17 to 2 Kings 13. As a participant observer of the phenomenal move of God in the Apostolic Church Nigeria Akoka Assembly, we witnessed the proceedings of the birth of a great spiritual awakening ignited around 1981 and climaxed in 1985. It was in what was to be known as Akoka Revival and the Akoka Assembly branch of the church in Lagos, Nigeria. The late James Olumade Shonde was raised mightily by the Lord publicly during a tarrying and anointing service on the 29th day of the general 30-day fasting and prayer for revival as directed by the Lord through prophetical ministry. Shonde testified to his prophetical injunction, to this prophetic injunction in his letter of application for ministry. In a succinct declaration, he reiterates that the injunction to hold a period of prayer and fasting for the whole metropolitan area in Lagos was proclaimed in a prophetic message during the monthly Lagos Inter-District Elders Lord's Day prayer and fasting meeting held at the Apostolic Church 42 Cemetery Street, Ebutemeta, on 7th March 1985. On the 29th March 1985, several days after the commencement of the prayer, later Pastor I.B. Fashoyin, late Pastor I.B. Fashoyin, later Apostle, resolved to conduct an anointing service. Shonde, after receiving the anointing oil due by the Holy Spirit, he subsequently began to do the work of an evangelist. He wrote his testimony in his application letter for full-time ministry with the church months after his divine call. And I quote, "With reference, I hereby submitted before you this application in accordance with divine revelation I received from God, and his hand upon me on the 29th March 1985 during a tarrying meeting held at the Apostolic Church Akoka Assembly, which was conducted by Pastor I.B. Fasoyi. The tarrying meeting started from 11 March 1985, end of quote. Shonde's interpretation of his calling indicates an understanding that what he now possessed was given to him by Olodumare, the supreme being in Yoruba thought. This he expressed when he wrote, and I quote, "In accordance with the divine revelation I received from God," end of quote. Shonde could testify, describing his experience with reference to the mighty works of God in him. His allusion to, unquote, "the hand of the Lord was upon me," end of quote, is a figurative declaration of his encounter with the Almighty God. What was witnessed that day can only be explained by the one on whom the Holy Spirit rested. The Holy Spirit came upon him immediately after he was anointed with oil. The smearing of the oil element on the head of adherents has been an age-long tradition with origin from the Old Testament in the separation of kings and priests into the high office. This has been practiced by every church tradition and denomination. The accompanied endowment witnessed by the bystander standards are an indication of the symbolic sacrament, the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Writing on the Christian understanding of sacrament, though defined in the context of Eucharist, Lewis Well defines a sacrament as an outward sign of the visible working of God's grace. The act of grace is the unmerited favor bestowed on creation for outstanding performance. The oil, just as the meal of bread and wine of the Eucharist, is understood by the church as a spiritual element that is administered as a means of impacting the needed spiritual power for special charismatic enablement. This means of grace informs three of the Apostolic Church tenets of faith, especially tenet 5, 6, and 9, respectively. These are, unquote, tenet 5, the baptism of the Holy Spirit for believers with signs following, Acts 2:4. Tenet 6, the 9 gifts of the Holy Spirit for edification, exhortation, and comfort of the church, which is the body of Christ. 1 Corinthians 14, 4-11. Tenet 9, church government by apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, elders, and deacons and deaconesses. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11-13, end of quote. The events that followed attest to the phenomenal call of Shonde to the apostolic ministry. Three days after, on 31st March, raised an alarm that Shonde could not be found. Pastor
Jeremiah, are you still there? ICT, looks like we have some technical challenges.
At SAT Friday, March 1980.
It looks like we have some technical challenges, or have to wait to see if Jeremiah can rejoin to continue with the presentation. Okay.
Yeah, sorry for the break in transmission.
Yeah, Rector, Jeremiah, if you could just stop sharing your screen and then turn off your video.
Yeah,
the connection seems to be a challenge.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So, the arena of the church was hence thrown into confusion at his disappearance. Pastor P.O. Ipen, the then Shomolu sectional pastor and Lagos area prophet, under whom Akoka Assembly is situated, had asked this to say. Late Pastor Shonde was a professional taxi driver who was proposing to change his car to Mercedes-Benz and a member of our Akoka Assembly during the time of Pastor Pashoy, who was the assembly pastor. They had a fasting and revival meeting. At this time, they had just finished building the Akoka mission house, but there were no rail from the first floor to the second floor. One Sunday afternoon, after the morning service, I was just trying to undress at Shomolu. The pastor and some elders came to my residence from Akoka and told me there was an incident in Akoka, that they held 3 days powerful prayer and fasting. The Friday evening, the Holy Spirit came mightily upon one of their young men who could not leave the church. He was in the church. If you talk to him, he would answer you in tongues. And fear came upon them. After the morning service, when they called him, he would answer in tongues. And should he fall while trying to descend from the second floor, what would they do? That was why they came to report the issues to me as their sectional pastor, to think of how we could bring him down safely. End of quote. Raised some useful questions. How did Shonde get to the second floor of the building that is without a parapet? The brethren who were voted with fear could not have left beside him on the first floor of the complete. For instance, where did he go? Where did he go? How did they locate where he was? It was gathered because some of us were not present that Pastor Fashoy summoned the prayer band, and while they regrouped at the first floor of the mission house to wait on God for direction. In the process, God revealed to one of them, who directed that they should go up to the second floor of the building. It is puzzling to know how it got there. Could this be a similitude of evangelist Philip's experience with the Spirit of the Lord in Acts 8:34 to 39? The initial design of the staircase that led to the first floor did not link the second floor. You need to turn around to the back of the building to access the other staircase that leads to the second floor. The staircase does not have any railing or guide, as Pastor Ipen confirmed. On the top floor, there was no parapet. How could somebody that neither opened his eyes nor spoke in understanding, but only in tongues and continuously in a state of trance, find himself on the second floor of the building, and for what purpose? Such were the experiences then at the beginning of the Akoka revival. James Olumide Shonde, from the title of this thesis, functioned in most of the accession offices and ministry gifts until his death at dawn on Sunday morning, August 10, 2014. The late Pastor James Olumide Shonde was a man of many parts. Shonde triples as the Ilesha metropolitan area evangelist, the Ilesha area prophet, and Urojo district pastor. As mentioned earlier, he was called first as an evangelist on the 29th March 1985 and the principal personality in the Akoka revival. Shonde served humbly under the authority of the Apostolic Church Nigeria for many years, carrying on his evangelistic ministry as a worker, unquote. A worker is popularly referred to as Onishe in the Yoruba terminology, as they were called then before he was ordained as a pastor and Lagos Metropolitan Area Evangelist in the same day, 17th February 1991, 6 years after his call, and dutiful ministration as a worker evangelist, that is, without a collar. The office would locate him later as the lead evangelist in Lona territory at his time. As Ipe notes in his book, during one of our meetings at Olomida Convention Ground, the Lord spoke through me that he should be treated as an evangelist, and so to be used by Lona authorities. Remarkably, the Lord used the same Ipe to call him into office of a prophet. As Ipe notes in the interview he granted at his hometown in Warri, I had asked him why he, Shonde, was with you at Shomolu. Did you take him to Pastor I.G. Sako, the then Lona chairman? He responded, no. But in council meeting, God used me to call him to the office of the prophet, end of quote. He was later consecrated into the office of the prophet in the body of Christ in the year 2007. His later exploits in spiritual endeavor seem to have been foreseen by his parents. A reflection on his name is a pointer to this. The name Olumade may have been derived from the primal or mystical view of Oluma Rock, for which Abeokuta derived his name. Note the preface Olu, note also the word Okuta, meaning rock. It was to this Oluma Rock the Egba ran for abode and security in the days of their flight from the Oyo and the Maye assailants. Going by the indigenous primal meaning of Oluma Rock, it is associated with the people's consciousness of the figurative hand of Olorun Olodumare, the supreme God in Yoruba conceptual thought. Yahweh is the Lord God over nature. Olu is also preface of Oluwa, Lord in Yoruba cosmology. Olumo, meaning mold. Oluma rock is a rock God molded and built with his own hand. This profound thought stressed African understanding of God as the Adeda, Asheda, the creator God. The name Olumade will mean Olumadewa, that is, his parents saw God's hand in the phenomena of his birth, and so, proclaiming the favor they had received, announced that God had brought this child to us by his divine grace. That Shonde's family lineage reflects on immanence of God is seen by the spiritual disposition of his father. The theological term immanence indicates the presence or an ongoing action of God within the created order. This is God's manifested deed in the terrestrial world. It is thus necessary to ask the following questions. What can be gleaned from an exploration of Shonde's life and ministry, and how can this address the problem associated with the operations of these offices and the use of spiritual gifts in the church? Findings from the research can help showcase how the Apostolic Church Nigeria understood and used this means of grace as an example for the contemporary New Testament church. It is observed that where the fivefold ministry is fully accepted and utilized, the spiritual and physical needs of adherents are met. The Holy Ghost, through the gift bestowed on humankind, edifies, exhorts, encourages, and comforts the church. 1 Corinthians 14, 1-3, Ephesians 4, 11-13. The depth of indebtedness to write as an eyewitness of the manifestation of the power of God cannot be overemphasized in the age of diabolical tendencies as practiced in some of the contemporary New Testament churches in Africa. Shonde's life and ministry can be an example of God's presence manifest in the life of a surrendered human agent. The research provides an opportunity to document the phenomenal event of an indigenous grassroots agent who though began at the lowest ladder, rose to be a pillar and reference point in the Apostolic Church Nigeria throughout his lifetime. It should be noted that except for few recent interventions, the history of the Apostolic Church Nigeria would have been lost into mere oral history. What we had is until now was only Samuel Adegboyega's short history of the Apostolic Church Nigeria. During the research, more materials were found written from Great Britain in the history of the Apostolic Church. See the bibliography. Methodology. The method of research defines the approach around the chosen topic, how and what type of material and information to source to carry out the research. While both the autobiographical and biographical study of Shonde is intended, Shonde is examined in the context of the Aladura Pentecostal movement. The research is qualitative, and as such, both literary secondary source and empirical primary source methodology is employed. The literary method includes a historical and empirical study of the umbrella movement and their contribution to African and world Christianity. The empirical study utilizes the result of the philological research and the findings of the autobiographical and biographical studies. Thus, the trio of historical, phenomenological, and biographical studies and methods of study is set to enhance the study. The empirical primary source utilizes fieldwork that includes the use of self-administered questionnaire, interviews, and participant observations as part of the instrument of research. Watson A.O. Omolokoli presented a comprehensive guide to doing a biographical study. He explored the effort of writing an African Christian biography that seeks to explore.
Jeremiah, yes, you have 10 more minutes to make your presentation.
Yes, sir. I'll move quickly to the sourcing materials for the research. Sourcing material for the research was initially tasking, but the impression from the revealed dream encounter with late James Olumide Shonde the commencement of the study kept me going. Neither of my supervisors knows the subject. Nothing has been done on him. After some consultations with them, it was obvious one had to go to Lagos and try to see what can be found. First, reading Alan Anderson mention was made about Arotona's collection available at the Birmingham University. The collection has lots of information and reports on African independent churches and the beginning of the Pentecostal movement. Thus, they need to visit Birmingham University to assess it. At the proposal, it was discovered that Zimmerman Library, ACI, housed the same Arotona collection. Thus, the journey began at Akrofi at the archive, exploring the collections. The material found therein point to locations at the National Archive, Nigeria, Ibadan, and Enugu, respectively. Letters were obtained from the registrar with the first point of call at the National Archive, Ibadan, and Enugu. Therein, useful information was found on the early inceptions of the Aladura movement, especially from the Precious Stone brand through the Faith Tabernacle USA to the British Apostolic Church. The police record of the visit of delegates from the British Apostolic Church, Pennygroves, South Wales, United Kingdom, and some materials on Apostle Babalola, among other documents on how the Nigerian audience conceptualized the movement at the onset and the colonial government's attitude to the emerging group were found. Stern instructions were given to the Obas, the kings, district, provincial officers, and chief to keep close eye on the unruly group. A series of arrests were made of the personalities at the center of 1930 revival, and the role of Pastor Babatope, the only ordained minister among them, were them visiting one prison cell to another. Next, Mama Dickness Fashoyin, whose husband and pastor, the late Pastor Abi Fashoyin, poured the anointing on Shode, was interviewed at Oshogo. She was an eyewitness and participant of the revival. Her eldest son, Overseer Kaode Fashoyin, was also interviewed to probe more to his late father's life and ministry. From there, the first visit was made to Elisha, to Rojo District Center, to see what can be found from the last district center, James Shonde Sab. Pastor Odetola, the district pastor and the Elisha area prophet, was unavoidably absent. He was transferred to Rojo to replace the late Pastor James Olumade Shonde. Fortunately, the assembly pastor was only able to provide the preaching register wherein Shonde's signature was seen in several Sundays and weekly services which he presided over and preached. Such registers was not found at Akoka, the place of his primary call, and later Ayaba District Center, where Shonde served for about 12 years. In each place, the preaching register and other documents have been either destroyed or removed, except for the opportunity to interview some notable members. It was at Orile-Osho, the district center, his place of third assignment, that a similar service register was found. At Urojo, the next point of call was the Lona Theological Seminary at Ibadan, where Shonde did his BTH degree. The seminary is located in a quiet area at the outskirts of Elisha, on the other side of Ife-Akure Road. The administrative block directly faced the entrance gate. Classrooms were situated on the left side, and the administrative block with a student hostel situated behind the admin block. The seminary library is located behind the classroom and the west of the school hostel. The head librarian was accommodating. The library is moderate. Shonde's long essay was located, while some photocopies of some books suggested by the librarian were made. A copy of the long essay was, however, obtained from the children. Documents retrieved from the children includes sermon notes, videotapes, photo albums that cover Shonde's early life, and subsequent ministry activities, especially photographs of testimonies of special day of a prayer service. Photocopies of correspondence letters showing they are made with the Apostolic Church Nigeria. Lona Territory was made with copies of his circulated prophetic messages, Bible study outlines, and special teaching outlines. Additional photographs were retrieved also from the magnanimity of Pastor De Adeoba in my visit to him at Odopetu District Center, Akure, Ondo State, on 29 September 2017. Adeoba reported to the supervising apostle for Teminko then, Pastor P.F. Usman. Pastor E.S. Awojide, the Lona chairman and the vice president of the Apostolic Church Nigeria, had earlier granted an audience at his office at the International Convention granted to Lagos. After presenting the letter from the registrar, he handed to me the authorization letter to go to any place of the Apostolic Church to make inquiries and conduct interviews. He however stressed out if anything can be found on the evangelist understudy, since the church is poor in record keeping. Mention was made of the frustration encountered at Yaba and a few other places. At some point, one of the Lona secretarial staff hinted at possible information at the publication department of the church and introduced me to the editor, Elder Adebisi. Notwithstanding with other challenges, Elder Adebisi, though through her effort, located virtually all the records of the special second Wednesday monthly prayer and fasting meeting tagged Temiko, what of my own. He also made available documentations of the regular quarterly meeting of Lona chairman with area prophets and evangelists. Shonde was led to establish the Temiko prayer meeting supported by other evangelists and prophets and was approved by the authorities of the church. On September 24, 2018, a second research journey was made to Rojo. And let me quickly get to my observation. Observation challenges encountered in sourcing resources for the research. As situated above, garnering source materials for research of this magnitude is tasking but interesting. The motivation first has been the interest and request to accomplish the set goal placed before me by the Lord in the episode of the dream, especially when information kept coming. I went from little information into a massive collection of oral interviews, videotapes, and MP4s, reports, and communicate around Shode's ministry. It became so fascinating to carry out the research. The common factor underlying resource gathering for this research lays in the lack of deliberate effort to keep proper records. There is general apathy on the part of the leadership to preserve documents for posterity. The National Archive has also been neglected. Hardly would you find new deposits beyond what the missionaries and colonial regime have done. The files and books are fast burning out. Lack of value for biographical studies among the apostolic churches, seminaries is also identified. As the search continues from one district center to another, the realities of what the chairman, the Apostolic Church Nigeria said, can be seen on display. The shelves, the storeroom files are not properly arranged. Records of the church are kept haphazardly in the places visited. The record you seek has either been removed or destroyed by the outgoing pastor, or rather still, when the incoming pastor takes over the office. There is no value placed on documents that can ensure that they are meticulously stored. The research suggests a correction of these menace. The leadership needs to take deliberate steps to preserve the legacy of the church. As we have noted, Shonde served in both Akok and Yaba district centers for 12 years each. At each place, notable works of signs and wonders were performed with tremendous growth spiritually numerically and infrastructural development of the church and its members. Sadly, no record of what God did through Pastor James Oluwaleshonde can be found, except in the history, both churches put together during the special occasions of 50th anniversary, like the Akoka in 2012, and new church dedication at Yaba within the reference made in passing about him. Whatever was gathered about God's dealing with Shonde in both centers, such as tapes, pictures, letters, were handed to me by the children, thanks to them. Commendation, however, should be given to late Pastor J.A. Akintola, the then Lagos area prophet and African district pastor, who was the second in succession after Shonde. It was in the file he left behind at Akoka that I found 6 circular prophetic messages from Pastor Shonde in carrying out this research. It was observed that a lot of details of the revival were being forgotten. Several days are being forgotten. It was also observed that there was seemingly biases in respondents' answer to questions and some form of rivalry among ministers, showing an attempt to discredit and misrepresent information. Conclusion: and autobiographical research into the life and ministry of Pastor James Oluwaleshonde is enabling documentation of a narrative that is gradually going into extinction. This can be noticed in the responses of some eyewitnesses in the process of the interview. In the attempt to reconstruct history, some either forget important dates or miss the content of the event under consideration. The reality of the research became clear at this revelation, except for an attempt to piece the stories together in this research. Resources for the autobiographical study are not readily available, as concerted effort have been expended seeking out sources from whenever it can be found. Lots of people are willing to give information, while some deliberately decline to say anything, despite their close involvement with the subject of the research. As regards the institution in which Shonde worked, the Apostolic Church Nigeria, there is no standing policy put in place by the top level echelon of the church for categorizing and documenting archival sources. That is a deliberate intention to store information for posterity. I am recommending that the church should embark on providing an archive and a library at the central headquarters, while pamphlets, files, records, reports, circulars, videos, corporate tapes of sermons, special events, occasion and anniversary, convention reports, land and building documentation generated in each area, district and assembly may not be destroyed as a matter of strict policy, and such documents must be kept properly in those places until certain times when the document can be transferred into the central place provided for it. Please pardon me to quickly just flip through the collection that I got from...
Jeremiah, your time is up. We will not have the opportunity to interact with you if you have to continue. We have only 25 minutes now to interact with you, and I think the interaction may be more beneficial. If a question comes up that you think what you want to share with us is relevant to answering the question, then you can maybe raise it.
Okay.
The floor is now open for us to interact with Jeremiah on his presentation.
Hello, Henry. Jeremiah,
Yes.
I found a lot of your presentation very interesting, particularly as they occurred around the Lagos area. And they sound like very recent events, as recent as in the 80s. Am I right?
Yes.
Right, okay. When different faith, how different is apostolic faith from the apostolic church?
Oh, okay, they are different. Actually, we have the apostolic faith in Great Britain, from where the apostolic church Britain actually branched out. But the apostolic faith in Nigeria definitely did not really have a connection with the apostolic church Nigeria.
Right. Any other question for Jeremiah? Yes, Dr. Iheanacho.
Yes, Jeremiah, well done, my brother.
Thank you, ma.
Thank you so much. Yes, I was wondering, especially with the video clip you showed at the beginning.
Yes.
No, the sound was off, so we couldn't tell what they were saying. So I'm asking if it was in Yoruba.
Yeah, it was and translated. There's an interpreter that was translating it in English.
Okay, so you have it all written down, don't you?
Yes.
All right, because that would be a source, because it was happening live, as they say. So if you have the transcript and the translation, then you already have a primary source document there.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm making a lot of transcription from the videos that I collected.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you also. Any other comments or questions for Jeremiah?
Yes, I have a question about the concluding. It's like, Jeremy, I think that getting to the end of your presentation, it appears that you're having some difficulty getting information from people. Do you know why they are not forthcoming with the information? Any reason why?
Yes, one very interesting reason. There are three evangelists at the time when Shonde was alive that they did ministry together. I met the two and agreed to interview them, and they both agreed. So I went after the first one at Odopetu in Akure, Ondo State. He kindly received me. Now, when I called the second person, he is at another area at Ekiti State. He bluntly refused to grant me audience. He said he doesn't want to have anything to do with Shonde. And of course, when I pleaded and the post tried to listen underneath his thoughts, I discovered that there are animosities. And of course, I found that animosity also with the first person that gladly accepted me, because, of course, there was a time when they were being sent outside Nigeria to minister in the US. And so the person that received me said, well, because he couldn't speak English, they did not allow him to go. But this other person said Shonde did a lot of evil against him, and I would not want to have anything to say. And of course, that drove me to, when I got to the children, to quickly look at the burial album to see whether he was present that day. And I saw that he was present. In fact, he was one of the lead persons, doing all of the burial arrangements and all of that. But he actually bare his mind at the bitterness that he had towards him, and I don't know what could have been the cause of that, because both of them were actually had the opportunity of going to the US. The third person said, well, when he got to the US later, his children invited him, that he got there and he found out that the people that were members of the church there were actually our members from Nigeria. And so why was it that he was not allowed to preach there in the first place, because most of them, they are also, from Nigeria, and they could hear Yoruba, and the message can be interpreted in English.
Thank you very much. That is interesting. I think you did a very good job by even trying to go behind the scene to even look at the album, whether he attended the fair. I think that is a good research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Jeremiah, thank you very much for the presentation. At the point, it's a very minor thing, but I think it's a serious thing. You are making the point that some of the records that were left, other pastors who came, you removed them. I was just wondering how you got to know that they were removed by pastors.
Yes, sir. In my interview with one of especially the overseer of Akoka Assembly, Overseer Adelufosi, that will come up later. He literally told me that the service register was torn. The pastor said, "Well, what use is this? Is this again to let us just use it to?" So when they were trying to look for one thing or the other paper to use, it was torn. The overseer specifically told me, because the overseer is an overseeing elder, is actually serving under the pastor. It was basically mentioned that some of those things were removed. At Yaba Assembly, they showed this junior brother, Shiji, Olushiji, which I also interviewed at Shagamu, told me that some of those things at Yaba was actually removed. And of course, at Yaba Assembly also, the elders I interviewed there told me that some of those things cannot be found, and we cannot find it. Now, one of the things that happen is that when a new pastor comes to a particular assembly, there are lots of used papers and documents that to them is not important, and they recklessly tear it and throw it away. And there are documentations to the fact that people testify to the fact that those things were recklessly destroyed. Even the national vice president and chairman of Lona Territory said that some of those materials were kept in the rain, removed from where they were thrown and kept in the rain, because they didn't value it. That was why he told me, where am I going to get information? He categorically told me that the information concerning this person cannot be found. But thank God, I was able to find some useful materials from the editor of the press for the church.
All right. Abraham, Dr. Waigi, I thought you had your hand up. And then Raymond, that.
Yes, Prof, I did, but I was sensing the question I needed to ask was being addressed. But let me just raise it, Jeremiah, so that you can respond in full. Mine from a literary point of view. As you hinted at, the Yorubas have been advanced ahead of many of all of the sub-Saharan Africans in terms of writing and documenting their history and their thought. I mean, Yoruba, the oldest language, can be reduced into writing in sub-Saharan Africa. So I'm pointing at that cultural pride that the Yorubas can claim and have demonstrated, especially. And this can be extended throughout Nigeria in terms of the literary output, whether you're talking about the creative writers or otherwise. Nigeria still leads Africa in terms of literary production. And you've hinted at storage of material, especially that case where material was put in the rain and destroyed. But I was wondering, even as you do this research, and even as you describe yourself as a participant observer, so you have a vested interest. What is the message to the church in terms of harnessing that cultural pride Nigeria has a very clear claim to that in terms of literature production and the biographies or church history and so on. What, in your judgment, what is the response that the church ought to take? Whether it's your church, in this particular case, your focus of study, or overall the African church, in terms of preserving documents?
Thank you, Dr. Waigi. I know that some members of churches have actually taken time to preserve documents. I think with the Apostolic Church, it's because of the value they place on education. It's appalling to see that, to note that informations are not properly kept. In fact, like I made allusion to the history of the Apostolic Church Nigeria, up till this recent time when we marked our 100 years anniversary, it was only the short history of the Apostolic Church written by Adegbega that was available for us until recent time when Professor Samson Fatokun committee was put together to put together our history. Of course, he has done a lot of work at the University of Ibadan on the Apostolic Church generally, and so we have a big volume that have been put together recently. I think the problem with the Apostolic Church has to do with the value they place on education. It is not the best. When you compare Apostolic Church with Baptist Church, with Anglican Church in Nigeria, the value they place on education is very, very, very low. Very, very low. And I think this is also affecting. And I made a comment under my footnotes concerning even the chairman of the Apostolic Church London Territory, because he was formerly the education director before he became the chairman. And he was making the statement that information cannot be found concerning a particular person. And he alluded to the fact that a lot of those materials were just thrown and littered around, that rain destroyed them. So for me, it's a big issue for me that they did not bother taking care of the informations that were supposed to be sacred for the church. I know that in recent times, one of the superintendents, Lagos area superintendent, CEO Onabanjo, who lived for up to 90 years, was saddled with the responsibility of collecting all of the landed properties, papers, which a lawyer was kept with him to do so before he finally passed on. But that could have also been lost, except for God leading them to create that office for documentation. So
Jeremiah, sorry.
Who is on floor now? Jeremiah, I thought you were done.
Yes,
You wanted to follow up?
I just wanted to say, having identified the problem very well, Jeremiah, and witnessed the extent of it, perhaps you could think more about the solutions, what need to be done practically as a ministry for the church, you know.
Yeah, and that was what I made in the observation I made in my conclusion, that steps should be taken to actually, especially enlighten the leadership on the need to keep records. And of course, I believe that at the end of this work, step will be taken to meet the national head to really reiterate to them the need to informations. and to really tenaciously seek after it and to preserve it.
Thank you.
Raymond.
Okay, thank you very much, Rector, and then Brother Jeremiah, for the good presentation, the revelation you had. I want, I don't know if you could throw more light on further motivation for why you chose Sunday as the one to research on, so others can learn from how to select a ministry or a particular minister in terms of impact to the church, to mission, or any other thing which serves as motivation. Is that clear?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's clear. Yeah, thank you. Like, well, if I could share my screen, I want to show to us the extract that I got down when I actually received this revelation on the September 24th, 2014. You can see on the screen what I tried. That was when I woke up about 6:38 in the morning. I quickly tried to scribble something down to really capture what I saw and then to try to reflect on it. Yeah, that the first motivation actually came from this dream, because there it showed I was with him in the office, and of course there were lots of literatures like files and all of that. This is where I kept it. This is his itinerary and all of that. And of course, for me, it was fascinating. And I thought, what could this mean? And of course, what eventually motivated my the manifestation of God's power in the life of an individual, diabolical means to do ministry, where people go extra mile to add something to Christ. Of course, for my MTH dissertation, you see that the Colossians, the major problem there was the fact that they said Christ is not sufficient. And of course, they were talking about adding that. But here I was particularly challenged, and I had the opportunity of being there the day Sunday was called. Of course, I had admission to University of Ibadan, but something happened. I had to come back home. And that was when they were holding the fasting and prayer. And sitting in the service, seeing the pastor anoint each of us with the oil, and seeing a taxi driver turning to a healer, turning to somebody that has a ministry where the dead were raised up, the blind were seeing, the deaf and dumb were hearing, and the insane were getting restored. It became a challenge to me, and I said, wow, this is awesome. God can endow us with power from on high. The old Pentecostal story is actually true. God is still dealing with men that surrender themselves unto Him. And of course, learning from Pastor I.B. Fashion, the one that poured oil on Shonde, his ministry was spectacular. He has a spectacular ministry of prayer and the study of the word, which he gave to us. And of course, he leads out in evangelism. He will be in the forefront. In 1981, he led the team of evangelists to somewhere at Onitiri in Yaba area of Lagos. And there was a place where you have the masqueraders. The masqueraders pour their charms on the people. Instead of they being affected, they were filled with the Holy Ghost. And that was why I said the beginning of the revival actually commenced in 1981 in the encounter of the evangelism team with those masqueraders. And the fire kept burning until 1985 when Shonde himself was called into ministry. So for me, it's a challenge to call ministers back to God, that God still endue with power from above. And Shonde is an example.
All right. We have barely 3 minutes. So if there is a last intervention, okay, we'll have to keep it brief so we can finish on schedule. Jonas, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, then go ahead, please.
Just for my learning, it looks like the research has been informed a lot by the dream. And also, I also hear from the language that there's been a lot of psychological influence on the candidate. To what extent was the psychological influence by your work with or the context in which you were operating? Don't you think it's actually affected your dream or I mean, I believe in the power of the Holy Spirit, but you were so involved that I'm wondering how you were able to distinguish that this is a voice that...
Well, I thank you, Reverend Jonas. I think I've been detached from Sunday many years back. Initially, when it was called in 1985, I told you I just came back from Ibadan due to some itch in my admission, and I was with him for 7 months, pouring water in his hand like Elisha did to Elijah. But after I left to the university at the University of Ife 7 months later, we were not so much close. Eventually, he was transferred to Yaba. He was transferred to Orile Oshodi. All the while, he was at Yaba, at Orile Oshodi, and then eventually to Uroju. We were not all that close any longer. In terms of psychological tendencies, I don't think that is. It became clear to me that what God has shown to me through that dream was actually a reality, because when I got to the press, to the editor, he took me into a room. When he opened the cupboard there, I saw massive material, documentations of his Teminko ports that span for almost 10 years or more in that place, which I actually transposed into PDFs, and they are available for me for analysis. And of course, the CDs that I got from the children, and one particular person was, I was directed, each of them kept telling me, I need to find him, one Olalere Ojo, and eventually I got him on his way to Abuja in Lagos International Airport. And when I met him, he has 30 videotapes of recordings that he has made concerning Shonde. And I have 30 audio and video tapes that he got. Olalere actually met Shonde at Shonde met Olalere at Uroju Assembly. And he said from the day he got Shonde got there, he felt that God was prompting him to begin to record all his messages. And thank God I was able to meet him. He has 30 audio and video tapes of Shonde's messages that he recorded, and I was able to get it on pen drive, and it's available for my analysis. So yes, the Sigmund Freud have talked about issues of psychological influences on dreams. The speaker this morning has shared to us how Daniel interpreted dreams of King Nebuchadnezzar. So generally, it's an incursion. I believe it is divine incursion to the terrestrial world for God to tell us some deep secrets that He wants us to work on. He revealed to Pharaoh in those days, and in dream, and Joseph interpreted it. The dream, we are not saying that the dream is psychological. By ACI standard, we believe in the spiritual and also in the physical. So that is the way I interpreted it. I believe God has actually commissioned me to do this work. And with the enormous materials that I now have at my disposal, based on what was shown to me in the dream, I believe it is God that has orchestrated that dream.
All right. Our time is up, but let me make this comment. Okay, Joshua has his hand up. We'll take. And Henry, you also have your hand up.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Okay. Quick interventions then.
No, yes, Rector Jeremiah, thank you for your presentation. I was just drawing your attention to some comments in the comment box that perhaps you can explore with the church the possibility of their lodging some of their historical materials here at Akrofi. Since we have an archives here, that is just something that occurred to me. And another student, I think, asked a question about your own materials that you have collected in the course of your research. So I think it has been suggested at different points, not just for Jeremiah, but for many of us doing research, that we are encouraged to lodge our materials in the archives.
Joshua, is Dr. who raises that issue? I'm just raising that issue.
Yes, Angus, sorry.
Yes.
So I think
Jeremiah has to lodge copies of all the material in the library anyway. You know, that is the rule. The field material you gather, you have to lodge copies in the library. So that is the broader advice from Joshua is to get your church to consider, lodging such materials at ACI as well. Okay, let's take before you respond. Let's take a final comment from Henry.
Oh well, thank you very much, Prof. I asked a question initially, but I think my internet went down. I didn't hear a word from Jeremiah what he said about my question from the beginning. If you don't mind indulging me with that, please.
Please, what's the question again, sir?
Oh, the question was, I said, I found your the historical account around Akoka and Yaba area very interesting because the Deeper Life, which came up such a big movement as well, came out of the apostolic faith. And what kind of relationship did they have? Was there any influence from the Deeper Life into the apostolic church at that time? Just wondering your comments and overview. Yeah, thank you.
Actually, because the church Akoka Assembly is actually at Yaba, very close to University of Lagos, where Deeper Life also originated. Of course, Kumuyi was a member of the apostolic faith at Bagada, Parida. Because the influence had was that several members of the apostolic church, at the time of the 1970 movement, 70, 80, we have massive movement of members from churches, and including the apostolic church Akoka, where they also went to attend the Deeper Life Bible studies at the Unilag, because Unilag is just about 15 minutes walk from Akoka Assembly then. And it's interesting that the Bible also eventually kindled at Akoka. I think one of the key connection will be that the Pastor I.B. Fashion actually, if you compare his teachings with that of Kumuyi, of course, with the tenets of the Apostolic Church, justification, sanctification.
Sanctification. Yeah.
Which are the basic Apostolic Church too. And that was emphasized by I.B. Fashion in those days when he was taking us through Bible studies and prayer meetings. That actually influenced, has influence on the people and was part of what motivated the revival.
All right. I think we need to conclude. Yeah, you're welcome at this point. I think it's been a...
So, I wanted to respond briefly to Dr. Joshua Setu concerning the Akrofi-Zimmerman Library. When I first visited the library and I looked at the Arotona collections, I was able to get a lot of information on the Babalola revival, the Akinyele, things on information on Aina. Of course, we are talking about use of water in those days. I think in one of the presentations, and the treatise that Pastor Aina wrote on the importance of use of water and all of that, I got a lot. Ayodele work on the African Independent Churches, Arotona works. I got a lot from there, apart from the source materials that led me to the University of Ibadan archive, the National Archive at Ibadan and Enugu. And of course, I've also made the video tapes, the VHS tapes I got. I've transcribed them to DVDs, and I made copies for the library, for the Zimmerman Library. I've done PDFs of all of the collections I got on the reports of the Teminko, which I'm going to share with the Zimmerman Library and some of those. And of course, I also found materials from the Church of Pentecost, Akrofi district. I found materials on the Apostolic Church and the Ghana Apostolic Church saga at that time, and intervention that the Kwame Nkrumah did in mediating for Church of Pentecost. I put it at the appendix of what I presented.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeremiah. And we are grateful for all the feedback and the interactions. We need to bring our first day to a close. And on behalf of all of us, I would want to say thank you very much to Right Reverend Bosman, to Professor Adufening, and to Jeremiah for their presentation. Yeah. You would all agree with me that it has been a rich period together, and we look forward to the remaining 2 days that by God's grace we'll all be blessed. I think that Reverend Bosman has reminded us of the importance of leading lives that can set a good example for others, whether we are thinking about figures in the Bible, especially Daniel, or as he appealed to on a number of occasions, the life and work of Kwame Bediako. And then Professor Adufening has reminded us of the fundamentals we need to keep in view when we are writing history, when we are writing stories about the lives of other people, or indeed our own lives. The need for us to be able to gather facts, to value, assess the facts. Some have said facts are sacred, comments are free. So facts that are established and are not in dispute, but when it comes to how we interpret them, we can bring our own perspectives to them. And that, of course, does not absolve us for meeting the highest standards, expected in historiography. And I believe that some of us have been reminded of these things. Some of us have learned them also for the first time. What really matters is making use of these rudimentary steps in our own writing. And Jeremiah has also reminded us of, from a Christian perspective, the importance of knowledge that is anchored in God and may come to us through a variety of ways. We'll have to, of course, test them so we are clear that we are in a position to articulate them, to make them, as it were, sensible to other people, to articulate them in a manner that makes them understand what it is that we have discovered and how useful the knowledge we have acquired or the knowledge that we generate can be useful to them as well. So thank you all very much for your participation. We received apologies from Professor Walls and Dr. Ingrid Walls. They couldn't be with us today. Hopefully they will join us tomorrow. On that note, I wish you a good rest of the day, and God willing, we'll see you all tomorrow. I want to invite Reverend Michael Naughty, if he's still with us, to close us in prayer.
All right. Yeah.
Yes, before the prayer.
From the green. Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes. We will continue as the rector has said, but tomorrow there's a feature which involves some friends of ours. Angus Crichton has joined us, and also Kiama Mugambi from the ATNP, the African Theological Network Press. Tomorrow we'll have a session with them. They've sent some documents, and registry has made them available, particularly to our PhD candidates and also those who have even finished and they want to publish. It's on publishing and some other aspects of the work of the ATNP. So I'll urge you to read the documents. There are two. So read so that tomorrow the interaction with them can be fruitful. Thank you very much, Rector.
Yes. Thanks a lot. I'm sorry for the oversight. I had in mind to invite you to share any announcements with us. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Michael, you can now go ahead.
All right, please let us pray. We are so grateful to you, our Father, for this day. It's been a fulfilling time beginning our doctoral seminars for this year. Thank you so much for the presenters and the grace you granted them to present and the various interactions that we've had. We pray, O Lord, that you continue to help us with all the knowledge that we have harvested from these presentations and discussions to apply them to the work in which we serve and the ministries in which you have called us to. We pray, O Lord, that you continue to be with us for the rest of the day. We also pray, O Lord, that you prepare those who are